the strongest support of the Fourth Hokage. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 254, Danzo. P.S. Even when I'm sick, I'll update 3 times. Come praise me and reward me. Time has always been the most ruthless blade. The strong write their own legends, but then they are buried in the dust of history, gradually forgotten in the loneliness of the years. Not to mention him, even Uchiha Madara, who could omnisciently know everything, was left with only a statue standing in the Valley of the End. But he's not dead yet, and it's not time for him to be forgotten by the world yet. Shimura Danzo. Because long ago, he lost a battle for power in Konoha's root, and many even thought he was dead, becoming a sacrifice for Senju Shinayu's ascension. But only the two of them understood the complexity of their relationship. So, when Shinayu came to his hut again and made this suggestion while sitting across from him over tea, he simply scolded him a few times and silently agreed. This old man, from the beginning, had only ever cared about Konoha. Even though in the original story he fought tooth and nail for the Hokage throne, it was likely that, besides his resentment towards Sarutobi, he was simply driven by a passion for the village. So, he agreed to this seemingly thankless, yet incredibly dangerous mission. It was nothing. His back, walking down the street, looked lonely and forlorn. Though transformed, the old man's posture was still intriguing. For absolute safety, he had no contact with his companions Itachi and Shisa before the mission began. Even fearing the possibility of his own capture, he didn't even learn their disguised identities from Shinayu. He had only a short time to spare. From the time he arrived at the Sands village to today, only 3 months had passed. This was due to his own arrogance, but also to Shinayu's trust. The plan had begun. Time was of the essence if they were to win this round, but for a safe escape, those two brats were also essential. As the saying goes, sharpening the knife doesn't delay the chopping of wood. In a flash, Danzo had a plan in mind. Let's find those two brats first. He was a serious person, always stern and serious during his missions, and this time was no exception. As for how, with no intelligence network, he had managed to uncover the true identities of the two in just 3 months? 2 points must be clarified. First, it wasn't necessary for Danzo to find both of them. Although he didn't know the identities of the other spies, Konoha's custom was to divide the duties of a 2-person team between transmitting intelligence and investigating it. In other words, only one of them could contact higher-ups, in other words, Konoha's internal intelligence personnel. This arrangement greatly reduced the risk of information leaks in the event of an unexpected incident. With only 2 people in the team, Danzo could thoroughly pass on the message by simply finding any one of them. Second, for Danzo, discovering the true identity of one of them would only take him a month at most. In the current situation, the most important thing for him wasn't these matters. The more important thing was, how could he convince the 2 people, completely unaware of Danzo's existence, of his identity? If he had gone according to plan, he would have had enough time to gain their trust and take control of the mission. But now, there was virtually no chance for the 2 spies, behind enemy lines, to reveal their identities to each other. If he simply stood there idiotically before those 2 brats, he'd probably be killed instantly. Putting aside their actual ability, doing such a meaningless task was clearly not Danzo Shimura's style. How could he, a lifelong conspirator, be deterred by such a minor difficulty? His experienced gaze gazed into the darkness. Compared to what he was about to do, this wasn't even difficult at all. The dividing line of the meeting, the night is not over yet. The gloomy and terrifying atmosphere has become more intense because of the attack, and it has been lingering for a long time. In this ever-changing struggle, closing your eyes and staying where you are is nothing more than an ostrich-like approach of only caring about the head and not the butt. In the end, it is inevitable that they will be wiped out by the enemy. In this case, Itachi and Shisa will certainly not choose to sit and wait for death. The intelligence had been transmitted, but waiting for intelligence every step of the way would be too rigid. At this critical juncture, the 2 imps also began to make their own plans. With tacit understanding, they both gave up their cover identities. That night, Before receiving further mission instructions, they silently guarded the area around Feng Ying's residence. The reason was simple. From the beginning, Masters Henayong had explained that the enemy's ultimate target could only be Yue. So if they wanted to take action, tonight was the best time. As long as they waited here for the arrival of someone, there would always be a chance to defeat the enemy's conspiracy. But things were far from going as smoothly as they imagined. Whoosh, the sound of wind blew, and in the completely dark background, a figure suddenly rushed towards the two of them. Although with the help of the power of the Sharingan, even in the dead of night, the two could still barely distinguish the enemy's shadow, but the sudden comer was no ordinary person. After two extremely fast exchanges, Shisu had his throat pressed against the opponent's kunai, and Itachi on the other side had also subdued the sudden attacker. Good reaction, a somewhat old voice sounded. In the darkness, the slowly rotating Sharingan in his right eye was clearly. Chapter 255, ready to make a move. P.S. I finished a chapter on my pad, so tired. Good response, a somewhat aged voice echoed. In the darkness, the slowly rotating Sharingan in his right eye was remarkably clear. First startled, then stunned. Compared to the powerful Konoha clans of the past, the current Uchiha clan, while not necessarily depleted in talent, is still thin in number. Even within Konoha village, it's rare to see a member of the clan, let alone in a place like this. Another Uchiha on a mission behind enemy lines? The possibility of such a thing is vanishingly small. But everything before him made it impossible not to believe it. The slowly rotating three Magatama was the most tangible evidence. So who was the other party? When does a spy completely trust another? The answer, never. Although these two brats weren't trained by Danzo himself, this was the most basic rule for spies. In other words, the moment a spy gave away all their secrets, that was the moment they lost their usefulness, the moment they met their doom. So, how could Danzo, alone behind enemy lines, prove his identity? The answer is still no. Danzo's current position leaves him no time to establish himself as the head of root among his opponents. Therefore, what he needs to prove isn't his own identity, but his own worth. So first, he needs a chance to speak with him. The Sharingan is a good stepping stone. But gaining their trust requires a little motivation. I know you must have many doubts. His voice remains as gloomy as ever. If Shinai were here, he'd probably scoff. He'd been playing that same voice with him too many times. It seems I didn't find the wrong person. You are indeed from Konoha? I don't understand what you're talking about. The voice remains cold, but since he hasn't resorted to killing, it proves that Itachi isn't completely unconvinced of their identities, and that's enough for Danzo. You don't have to understand, the old man said without any hesitation. My identity has been exposed. By tomorrow at the latest, the Sand Ninja will find out that the two tongues of the Anbu surveillance squad have been killed by me. Shisu and Itachi did not answer, because so far the other party has not provided any reason for them to stop. The kunai have not been stopped, and the two sides have only retained a minimum communication platform. The matter of life and death is still uncertain. But I have obtained some extremely secret information. The old man spoke in a calm tone, as if he was not worried about his situation at all. Tonight, Uchiha Airi, who invaded the village, will attack together with his spies arranged in the village in advance. He paused, first glanced at the darkness when he came, and then continued. The target is naturally the one-tailed Jinchuriki of the Sand Village, One Tail. Although this coincided with Itachi and Shisu's previous inferences, he still couldn't help but feel a sinking heart when he really had to face Uchiha Airi. It is certain that the opponent's combat ability far exceeds that of an ordinary Kage. Although Shisu and he both possess a Sharingan, whether in terms of combat experience or hard power, the gap between them and Airi is simply immeasurable. Are you here to pass on this information? The kunai in his hand approached the opponent's throat again. If this is true, then the person in front of him must not be spared. An exposed spy is enough to bring them big troubles beyond their ability to deal with. The old man chuckled. Of course there's more to it than that. Just as he finished his words, a rustling sound could be heard in the distant darkness. Pursuers. Was it this guy who led them? There was no time to be distracted. In a moment, it would be a life and death battle. Then, why don't you listen to my last suggestion? The conspirators' plan had already begun to unfold. Human nature is fickle, and there is never-ending suspicion and testing of each other. This is certainly a flaw of mankind, but for those who are good at manipulating people's hearts, what alliance is more solid than sharing a common enemy? A dividing line filled with ghosts. The night is deep, and the shadows are scattered. The bleak streetscape framed her lonely figure. The moon was bright in the sky, the ignorant people were still asleep, and even the ninjas still on duty seemed to ignore this strange visitor. Although it couldn't be as perfect as it had been back then, in reality, just being able to invade was enough. As for using the mirror flowers and water moons to control everyone? Irie sneered. Why bother dealing with the current Sans shinobi? There was only one Senju Shinayu in this ninja world. When he looked up again, the Kazakage building was already in sight, and somewhere within it, hidden was the young Chuyuriki of the one-tailed Shukaku. Irie narrowed his eyes for no apparent reason, as if this simple matter would encounter some twists and turns. Could it? Irie's smile grew even more wanton. Chapter 256, Strike first to gain the upper hand. P.S. I had a fever yesterday. I thought I'd almost recovered that evening, so I didn't go to the hospital. But today it got worse. I can't get back up. My apologies to everyone here. This is the first update. Next. I'll try to figure it out. As usual, I'm begging for everything. The night conceals conspiracy and death. Of course, since long ago, that inky background has given the most support to the ambitious. Urgency and death, mission and fate. Three people began to move in the darkness. Undoubtedly, compared to the shrewd Danzo, the two young men were a bit inexperienced. With pursuers behind them, the two young men chose to compromise. While they couldn't confirm the identity of the person before them, compared to immediate exposure, this outcome was a pretty good one. Yes, this was within Danzo's calculations. He always thought he had a pretty good grasp of the nature of young people. Even Shinayu, now known as the foremost ninja, couldn't escape his predictions. As a temporary alliance, after a brief exchange, leadership of the team was ceded to him. It was nothing more than some desperate marketing tactic. It's far too difficult to sway someone solely through benefits and potential gains. In other words, if you truly want others to follow your desired path, it's far better to show them a sea of fire behind them than to offer them a perfect blueprint. Stopping or looking around would lead to death, and the only way out was the path you'd pointed out. Finally, after providing his own identity. Thus, the alliance was easily formed, and Danzo naturally assumed temporary command. Even so, when he actually issued his first order, there was the expected backlash. He didn't blame these young people, for they weren't Danzo's trained force in the first place. Their unwavering obedience was supposed to be directed only to the root, to their highest leader, not to him, Shimura Danzo. Of course, there's another reason. Danzo's order is truly bizarre. Judging from their positions, the three are still scattered around the Kazakage building. According to previous intelligence, the Sans Ninja Jinchuriki who will replace Garuda is none other than her and the fourth Kazakage's son, Gaara, and right now, 4-year-old Gaara should be living here. In other words, if the other party's ultimate target is Shukaku, the one-tailed beast, they should launch their plan to capture Gaara tonight. Konoha has no obligation to help the Sans Ninja protect their own tailed beasts, but that doesn't mean Danzo will sit idly by. Don't get me wrong, the root of Konoha isn't so kind as to sit around and maintain world peace. But if the other party's goal is indeed to collect all the tailed beasts, then Konoha's 9-tailed beast will sooner or later become their target. For both Shinayu and Danzo, nipping this potential threat in the bud would be the best option. However, since the opponent was the legendary Uchiha Madara, a single fatal strike wouldn't be so easy. The next best option was to delay the enemy, slowing their acquisition of the tailed beasts. This would give Konoha more time to prepare and more confidently respond to any potential dangers. But relying solely on Danzo and two brats, they were merely spies, after all. From the outset, this team wasn't intended to directly confront Uchiha Irie. Even without Kyoka Sujetsu, his combat power was formidable. The Uchiha Sharingan possessed more than just 3 Magatama. Records and information on the main Gekyo Sharingan existed before Washi's opening, though they were incomplete. Washi's opening reminded Konoha of the power of the main Gekyo Sharingan, and Irie's arrival as a Ronin only unleashed its terrifying power. Though confined to their own rooms, Danzo knew they alone could not stop her plans. Unless the Sans Shinobi could resist Uchiha Irie's invasion, only then would they be able to prevent her from taking the Jinchuriki. Unfortunately, Danzo and his men were spies, already discovered spies. They now had no standing or credibility to convince the Sans Shinobi that an invisible enemy had emerged from within the village. Itachi and Shisu were still merely suspicious of Irie's invasion of the Sans Shinobi village, but Danzo, as an eyewitness, Though he also hadn't discovered the specific time of their infiltration, these similar tactics, the hypocritical and fruitless raids, and the use of mirror flower and water moon, all these signs confirmed to Danzo that their goal was the same as their previous attack on Konoha, simply to enable Iari's ability to function. However, compared to that attack, Iari had a shorter window of opportunity, and the area affected by the ability was much narrower. In other words, if they wanted to maximize their ability, there was no better time than tonight. They were bound to come. Given this premise, Danzo's decision was even more decisive, and, of course, it was irrational and astonishing. Attack the Kazakage building. Chapter 257, Ginger is still spicy with age. P.S. I just got back from an IV drip. A minor illness has escalated into a major one. So frustrating. Attacking the Kazakage building? Shouldn't that be to help the Sans Shinobi defend themselves? Of course not. As I have said before, even with the forces Danzo can muster right now, they're not enough to defeat Uchiha Iari. And the so-called unity of the Sans Shinobi in the Kingdom of Japan is based on the understanding and forewarning of the enemy's capabilities. In the ninja world, intelligence is crucial to victory or defeat, otherwise, Konoha wouldn't have sent spies to other villages. Conversely, no one will show you mercy just because you don't know, they'll only be more eager to trample you underfoot. The world is so simple and cruel. And how can we expect the ignorant Sans Shinobi to help Danzo and his men in this fight against an invisible enemy? No, that's unrealistic. I'm afraid the moment Danzo and his enemy engage, the Sans Shinobi will turn their weapons on these unidentified invaders. Therefore, the so-called helping the Sans Shinobi or helping the Wind Kingdom is absolutely impossible. Besides, this wasn't what Danzo wanted. Providing unpaid aid to other villages like this was clearly not Danzo Shimura's style. Having weathered countless wars, Danzo had learned to remain calm at all times, the so-called putting the interests of the village first. He had to help the Sans Shinobi because if Shukaku were captured, Konoha would face a further threat. But at the same time, he couldn't actually lend his sword, as doing so would undoubtedly drain Konoha's own strength to protect the enemy. For all these reasons, Danzo ordered the attack on the Kazakage building. It wasn't a grand, frontal assault. To capture the Sans Shinobi's highest authority with just 3 spies was a pipe dream, and for him, such an approach would offer no benefit. He had to infiltrate stealthily and search for a key figure. That's right. He was looking for the Sans Shinobi village's Jinchuriki, Sandstorm Gaara. Without a word. Danzo's overwhelming strength allowed him to quickly capture the first tongue, and his approach was more in line with the root style, covering the opponent's mouth and nose. He couldn't make any sound in a short time. In order to prevent possible resistance, both arms were broken at the same time as the attack. The intense pain made him sweat instantly. At this time, a sharp kunai had already cut his throat. Half an inch deeper, and he would have taken his life. I ask your answer, but it's best to speak quietly and don't breathe heavily. The angle of the kunai changed slightly, and the cold light pierced the person's body. Otherwise, I don't need to do anything, your trachea will naturally be cut. Okay, now listen to me. Danzo's voice did not carry the fierceness that people imagined, and it was even almost the same as his usual tone. But it was this calm tone that made people subconsciously dare not imagine the consequences of resisting him. Where is the one-tailed Jinchuriki? The surprise in his eyes flashed, but it did not escape Danzo's eyes. The kunai in his hand tilted another half an inch, and blood immediately spurted out. You don't know, or you don't want to tell me. As if he was doing something insignificant, he covered the other person's mouth and nose tightly, and watched him gradually stop struggling. Then, he hid the body in the earth and rocks as if it were a torn sack. Before anyone noticed, his figure quickly disappeared into the night. And soon after he left, strange runes suddenly climbed up the chest of the corpse, and in a moment, a strange mouse crawled out of the dead ninja's clothes. It first sniffed the surrounding smells, and then disappeared just as quickly. Finally, after seeing this scene, Danzo, who had been waiting for a long time, smiled. Humans are like this, they always doubt all the truths told to them by others, but they firmly believe in the fallacies they have discovered. Someone wants to snatch the one-tailed Jinchuriki, no matter through whose mouth the words were conveyed to the Sans Shinobi. From the current standpoint, what the Sans Shinobi should be most suspicious of is definitely not the safety of their own Jinchuriki, but whether Konoha wants to use this to lure the tiger away from the mountain and launch a terrible attack on the Sans Shinobi village. But, what if the Sand Shinobi's own Enbu sees the other party's omission and discovered this intelligence? Then, for the Sand Shinobi, both their level of attention and vigilance would be drastically different. The plan has begun. Now, all we need to do is seize the opportunity and light the final ignition. The Sand Shinobi's response is completely predictable. Next, the Jinchuriki will be transferred to another opponent. Whatever that destination is, it will undoubtedly differ from the information Uchiha Irie had previously received. The Sharingan isn't omnipotent. Irie may be able to deceive everyone with her powerful eyes, using mirrored flowers and watery moons, and use her hypnotic eyes to extract information from other ninjas, but she's still not a true immortal. What you don't know is unknown. Information, like knowledge, has a source. Unless Irie is willing to choose this moment to instigate a war within the Sand Shinobi and use her own power to forcibly seize it. If she does so, she might succeed by cooperating with the mysterious individual who attacked the village with her, but it's certain that both the Sand Shinobi and Uchiha Irie will pay a heavy price. If the Sand Shinobi ultimately triumph and the One Tail is preserved, Konoha's goal will be achieved. If Irie were victorious, the mysterious force she and the others formed would inevitably pay a heavy price, clearing the way for Konoha from another direction. Regardless of who ultimately triumphed in this war, the ninja world would undoubtedly recognize Uchiha Irie, recognize this immense power lurking in the darkness. In other words, if Irie chose to start a war here, he would be declaring war on the entire world. Regardless of the calculation, Danzo's goal had already been achieved. Unfortunately, this game of chess hadn't even begun, but for Shimura Danzo, it was already over. Chapter 258, The Last Move. PS First update, as the night deepened, the Sand Shinobi began their frantic movement. The command, issued by the Fourth Hokage himself, was quickly disseminated throughout the village: spot the intruder, and the primary target was the one-tailed Jinchuriki. Honestly, Gaara, protected by sand since childhood, was seen by the village as a mere weapon, like his mother, and they held no attachment to the vessel itself. However, if their weapon were simply taken away, no one would likely agree. After all, this wasn't a decade later, a time of long accustomed peace. The Senju clan emblem carved into the crease of the sky reminded the Sand Shinobi that war wasn't as far away as they'd imagined, and that some of these monsters possessed the power to single-handedly destroy entire nations, including even the 5 great nations. Just as Danzo had predicted, the Jinchuriki was immediately relocated, and intelligence from the later captured tongue revealed that the place where Gaara had been guarded was now deserted. This meant the Sand Shinobi had already reacted to the situation, but only one step remained. In the darkness of night, Danzo quietly crept to the residence where the Jinchuriki had once been hidden. He waited silently. As planned, the commotion was about to begin. Fire style, Great Fireball Jutsu. It wasn't a high-level ninjutsu, but in the hands of the Uchiha clan, naturally adept at using fire style, this classic fire style ninjutsu nonetheless displayed remarkable power. With a single strike, the walls of Gaara's former room were breached from the outside. The searing flames also engulfed the interior, leaving a devastated scene, but the occupant was long gone. Enemy attack, a long cry erupted. Surrounded by a dense enemy, they unleashed the white area offensive ninjutsu, and unfortunately, the most easily detected fire style. Like worker bees discovering their nest under attack, the Sand Shinobi immediately unleashed their deadly stingers. Attack. Wind-style ninjutsu has always been the Sand Shinobi's forte. Within moments, the very spot where the attacker had stood was ravaged and shattered. Although Itachi hadn't directly intervened in the battle due to Shinryu, that didn't mean a genius wouldn't make a mistake at a time like this. He immediately fled after launching a fire-style attack, his target pointed directly towards the village. Having exposed his identity in the enemy's lair, even a minute longer would be extremely dangerous. Danzo had repeatedly warned him of this before the operation. All he had to do now was escape, the faster the better. Uchiha Itachi fled, and the Sand Shinobi began their frantic pursuit. If this were the end of the matter, it wouldn't be perfect after all. Transferring the Jinchuriki would indeed ensure the One-Tail's safety for a while, but for Irie, who had already infiltrated the village, as long as the Jinchuriki remained, she would surely have another chance to strike. Once Danzo and his men had evacuated and the Sand Shinobi village's defenses had relaxed again, that would be her best chance. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps next year, but Danzo couldn't leave his fate to the uncertainties of possibility. For the old man, Only solid intelligence and the power he held within his grasp were truly reliable. All else was merely wishful thinking, meaningless. Hence, the scene unfolding. Fire style, great fireball jutsu. The exact same jutsu. Even the sounds and the power of the jutsu were nearly identical. This time, the terrifying jutsu struck the other corner of the Kazukage's building. Boom. Flames shot up into the sky, and figures scurried. The pursuing Sans shinobi paused, looking back in astonishment. The blazing flames were blazing directly in the direction of the Kazukage's building. Were there more than one enemy? While they were certain this was likely a small-scale elite invasion, their current estimate of the enemy's numbers was off. Fearing a shifting tide, the Sans shinobi hesitated to pursue further, leaving only a small force behind while the majority immediately turned back. And then something unexpected happened again. The second appearance of the fire-style ninja, still lingering, turned and fled without hesitation after the sand-style ninja returned. Meanwhile, from another direction, a terrifying ninjutsu struck again. Earth-style, digging and excavation. Though not his specialty, his old rival, the Third Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen, was known as a man unbeatable even on Earth. How could Danzo not be familiar with his most skilled Earth-style ninjutsu? Even if it wasn't his primary skill, in Danzo's hands, this technique was more than double the power of the two geniuses' attacks. The already shaky Kazukage building was on the verge of collapse, but at that moment, a wave of sand suddenly surged up, saving the building from collapse. The Fourth Kazukage. The sandstorm didn't stop, but continued its march towards the attackers. Danzo, having struck first, smiled faintly and also turned, disappearing into the darkness, as if he had never been there. No need to pursue. Sudden release of ninjutsu exposed one's position, and the result was only a certain degree of damage to the Kazukage building. Any rational ninja would not make such a decision. The result of doing so is nothing more than exposing oneself to the opponent's pursuit, which is simply seeking death. Except for one possibility. What if the opponent is deliberately luring the enemy deep into the territory or luring the tiger away from the mountain? Thinking of the attack launched earlier today, Gilai's heart was filled with more gloom. The sand ninja was weak and could not withstand any blow. Instead of choosing to pursue them relentlessly at this time, it is better to take steady steps. He is almost certain that the opponent still has troops hiding inside the village. Everyone, hold your post. Chapter 259, Did you expect it? P.S. Second update. Keep asking for everything. Only fools would always expect a permanent solution. In this world, there are so many conflicts and conspiracies between people, and the knowledge and truth that each individual possesses is so limited, universally applicable rules are not easily obtained. More often than not, people need to make constant compromises and calculations to ultimately achieve their goals. Danzo never thought that his actions would permanently eliminate the future troubles, whether it was against Uchiha Airi or the Sans Shinobi. A world-leading force, a superpower backed by a great power, each of them has countless cards up their sleeves. The simplest and most foolish method is of course to tell the Sans Shinobi that it was Uchiha Airi, who possesses the ability of Mirror Flower and Water Moon, who attacked them, but in reality, doing so is doomed to gain nothing. So Danzo chose to compromise, foregoing the most tempting solution and opting for his own solution. While there was no guarantee the one-tailed Jinchuriki was completely safe, at least for the next few months, Airi would have a hard time finding an opportunity to attack the one-tail, and that was enough. Given enough time, having stopped him once, Danzo was confident he could thwart his plot again. It was a brilliant plan. From a tactical perspective, Danzo had achieved all his objectives up to this point, but strategically, he still faced one final hurdle. Konoha's early intervention could indeed delay Uchiha Airi's plans. On the other hand, it was precisely this intervention, and, worse still, its unconventional nature, that gave Uchiha Airi, still operating in the shadows, an opportunity. Setting aside future plans, the imminent threat was the result of this strategic choice. Did you expect this? A figure gradually became clearer in the darkness. Tisk, the last time they invaded Konoha, they were so focused on controlling the main battle force that they forgot about the elders. A divine robe with a black background and red clouds appeared out of thin air, and the mask covering her face only added to the unease. Although they had never met before, at this moment, considering the force fields between the two sides, it was obvious that only one person could stand here and speak like this. Uchiha Airi. Although the young people had witnessed the power of this leading ninja in the blitz outside the sand village, Irie had not yet used his full strength, and secondly, they were not the first to bear the brunt of the attack. Although the enemy had not yet shown any signs of attacking, the two children instinctively tightened their kunai. The previous chase had already exhausted their energy, and from the current situation, they had no chance of defeating the enemy. Rather than put up a futile resistance, they should seize the opportunity to escape. In contrast to their anxiety, Danzo stood before them, his eyes slightly closed, silent, yet fearless. I'm also curious about the abilities of the heroes of this new era. You want to know? The three Scarlet Mogatamas suddenly converged into an even more deadly Mangekyo. In the blink of an eye, the atmosphere between the two sides was no longer as peaceful as it had been initially. The tense situation made everyone nervous. Then why close your eyes? Lowering his eyelids was certainly Danzo's habit, but this time, he might have been planning to deal with Uchiha Irie. There was no need to deny, and no plan to deny. This is simply a necessary choice to win. Oh? You want to win? The threat of the Mangekyo remained, but Irie's lips curled up again with a smile. Win style, vacuum ball. In response to her question, Shimura Danzo attacked. A direct attack? Was it self-destruction or a premeditated plan? Irie didn't believe he had the ability to defeat her, but in this situation, not retreating but fighting with all his might. This wasn't Danzo's style. As the most powerful conspirator, this old man was, in some ways, a more troublesome foe than Senju Shinryu. Don't stray too far from me, he warned. While Danzo's custom was to sacrifice anyone for victory, the two brats behind him weren't his trusted confidants, and secondly, it wasn't time for them to be sacrificed yet. While he was persistent, even passionate about rule with iron and blood, that didn't mean Danzo was indifferent to the cultivation of Konoha's future talent. If his philosophies weren't different, he would be a leader no less capable than Sarutobi. The reason Danzo remained calm in the face of Uchiha Irie was, of course, because he still held his last trump card. Success in tactics but failure in strategy wasn't Danzo's style, and with this card, he could minimize such risks. His eyes remained tightly closed, never opening. The wind style, eight-sided wind, immediately following the vacuum wave, further restricted Uchiha Irie's movements. While it wasn't difficult to escape, the brief moment was enough. The talisman, held in his palm for so long, finally activated for the first time with chakra, and a golden flash of light followed. Miyako's eyes narrowed suddenly. Indeed, when it came to support capabilities, Konoha's current state was truly terrifying. Did you expect this? Turning sideways, behind the Fourth Hokage Minato, the old man's sinister voice echoed, neither sad nor happy, yet seemingly mocking everything. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 260, Grievances. P.S. Third update. Please everyone, please vote a little more today. A little more. Shinryu smiled, crouched down, and opened his arms. Be good, come here, my princess. While Shinryu was torn between improving his strength and competing openly or covertly, his devotion to his daughter, Chinatsu, was extraordinary. It could be said that whenever his family was involved, especially little Chinatsu, Shinryu would drop everything without hesitation. This daughter, his Aunt Tsushiya's daughter. Just that reason was enough. Shinryu the little girl smiled sweetly as well, her arms spread wide, and she bounded towards Shinryu, then was embraced by her father. Never had he imagined that a warm, solid, and trustworthy embrace filled with love and tolerance would come so easily, so naturally. In the corner, little Shion, also held in Orochimaru's arms, felt a sudden pang of pain in her heart. Children don't understand heartbreak, for they have their parents' protection, never having to face the harsh realities of life at such a tender age. Little Shion, having never felt a father's love, could only stand on tiptoe outside the door. She trembled against the door's edge, curling her fragile body into a ball, weeping as she waited for the storm to pass. The baptism of wind and dust had made her pearl even more dazzling, but it had also prematurely forced her to don a mask to avoid harm. Her delicate white hands pressed against her chest. Little Xiao suddenly regretted begging her uncle to bring her here, no explanation or words were needed. The strange feeling of blood connection instantly allowed her to spot the tall man teasing the girl in his arms in the crowd. That handsome, reliable, and Sunny Man was the man she should have called father. A sudden ache shot through the tip of her nose, and a warm liquid filled her eye sockets, lingering and flowing before trickling down her cheeks. She bit her lower lip tightly, wanting to say something, but only sobbing foolishly, unable to speak. Little Xian felt pain for the first time. The scene before her eyes was sharper than any previous criticism or ridicule, as if a precise knife had stabbed her heart fiercely. But for some reason, she was unwilling to look away. It was obvious that if she looked at it one more time, she would feel even sadder. It was obvious that the more brightly the girl, who is the same age as her, smiled, the more blurred her eyes would become. She knew that the cold embrace protecting her belonged to her uncle, but she still couldn't help but imagine herself and her mother being held in the arms of that familiar stranger. The more beautiful it was, the more hurtful it was. The more heart-beating it was, the more distressing it was. The more she cared, the more wronged she felt. Unconsciously, the little hand that was grabbing Orochimaru's collar was holding it tighter and tighter, holding it tighter and tighter. Because of the excessive force, the originally fair and delicate little hands looked even paler and fragile, which made people worry. Compared with those gifted little ghosts, the young Sachian was actually more like an ordinary girl. She would act like an ordinary little girl and cry like an ordinary little girl. But compared to the daughters of ordinary families, as the next generation of Miko, she had never had her own father since she was a child. Sad? Praying? Orochimaru shook his head, that was for sure. But little Sachian would never let her mother see herself like this. As a child, she would rather stubbornly sit alone in Orochimaru's laboratory and sob softly than cry out loud. Orochimaru has seen too many times the kind of sobbing where tears and snot flow freely down the face while biting the lower lip. He finally believed that humans are born imperfect. In the deepest part of their hearts, no matter how they disguise themselves or change, there is always a softest place. Not wanting to touch it, let alone dare to touch it, Orochimaru instinctively pushed himself away from it, but in the clear, he extended a helping hand of pity and lingering. This is a cute and pitiful little girl. Until today, she has really endured too many things that she should not have endured. Fate is never fair. Orochimaru has understood this truth a long time ago, but he still brought Sachian here, to cause trouble for Minato. At this point, even this excuse couldn't fool himself. He admitted that he'd actually felt compassion for this little girl. Without any additional reason or excuse, he was willing to pay any price. A rough hand brushed against little Sachian's head. You must be scared, right? Orochimaru, who had watched her grow up, couldn't help but understand the struggles and grievances of that little life trembling in his arms. Sachian, don't cry, a hoarse voice sounded. Orochimaru, who never knew how to comfort anyone, never even considered comforting anyone, was at a loss. He could only speak clumsily, even with a slight tremor, as he remembered a normal person. If you're not feeling well, let's go back first. Without answering, the girl shook her head desperately, her eyes fixed on the direction where Mayu and Shinatsu were playing, just for a moment, just a second longer. He sighed helplessly, not knowing if it was from self-reflection or perhaps a resolute decision. Standing aside would never yield any results. What needed to be faced had to be faced. Rather than letting Sachian return with regret and pain, it would be better to have a clear fight. Finally, Orochimaru took a step forward, heading right towards where she was supposed to be. Chapter 261, The Intersection of Fate. With his little daughter in his arms, Shinai remained the man who stood at the pinnacle of the ninja world. For him, many powers incomprehensible to ordinary people had become instincts, perhaps simply a way of viewing the world. Unlike ordinary people, in Shinai's world, humans were more like manifestations of a certain life force. While the forms he saw and perceived were essentially the same as those of a normal person, the way they were perceived was completely different. While illusions like those of Kagome Sujetsu, which fully manipulated all five senses, wouldn't have had a miraculous effect against ordinary people, even the most sophisticated transformations wouldn't have escaped Shinayu's discerning eye. He chuckled softly, the little princess in his arms curiously looking at her father. While Orochimaru's facial imitation skills were indeed exceptional, and even his body seemed to have undergone some kind of special transformation, perhaps due to soft transformations, this disguise was meaningless to Shinayu's perception. Orochimaru was still Orochimaru. No matter how his appearance changed, in Shinayu's eyes, he was still the same old Uncle Snake. Nothing. He narrowed his eyes and smiled, then caressed little Chinatsu lovingly. Shinao had always been accustomed to shielding his little princess from all the hardships. Chinatsu's talent was undeniable, and having made it this far on his own, how could Shinao not know that setbacks and hardships were the best motivation for a child's growth? But as a father who loved his daughter almost madly, how could he overcome the conflict within himself? Turning around, Shinao didn't let go of Chinatsu in his arms, but calmly walked towards Orochimaru. Before he spoke, a hint of teasing curled up the corner of his mouth. Although he had already noticed through his perception, when the equally delicate little girl appeared in Orochimaru's arms, Shinao was still 3 parts surprised and 7 parts delighted. Was this Orochimaru's daughter? After all, that forced expression, yet a hint of concern, couldn't be faked. If it was just a test subject, Orochimaru would definitely not hold her in his arms so lovingly. Such a character doesn't appear in the original novel. Although Shinao rarely thinks about the original novel now, he's certain that the appearance of this little girl is also the product of a butterfly effect. Your daughter, for some reason, though the question was meant to be teasing, the moment he opened his mouth, Shinao felt a sudden palpitation. The trembling and despair from the depths of his soul, transmitted from another, more fragile soul to his heart, and then, like a hammer hitting his heart, it took his breath away for a moment. A terrible stiffness spread from his arms, as if his words had just spoken were completely wrong. Orochimaru didn't spray venom as he usually did. He didn't even offer a simple reply. His eyes held a complex mix of emotions, like blame, yet also like silence. And in his arms, the little girl's already tear-stained eyes grew even more blurry, her tiny body trembling, her expression and emotion simultaneously extinguished. She wept woodenly, heartbroken woodenly. Her fantasy shattered, as Shin could no longer imagine herself resting peacefully in his arms. That smile, that playful tone, instantly sent the little girl reeling in a cold icy hollow. She stubbornly turned her head away. Leaning against Orochimaru's chest, she wanted to go back. She never wanted to, and absolutely never wanted to, return here again. Father and daughter were connected by heart. How could Shinao truly be unaware of this inextricable entanglement in their blood? Who is she? The stiffness passed through his arm to Chinatsu in his embrace. The little girl, with her wide, round eyes, took in everything before her with curiosity. Even if she was precocious, a child approaching was still just a child. The little princess couldn't understand why the usually calm Shinao had lost his composure. Similarly, she, a mere girl, felt a certain innate warmth towards the inexplicably saddened little girl before her. The little princess reached out, as if wanting to touch her cheek, pat her back, wipe away her tears. But Orochimaru took a step back, silently dodging. One was the princess of Konoha, the other, a penniless Miko. Perhaps it was destined that they would be the closest of hearts, but any slightest touch would wound Shin's already shattered heart. So Orochimaru refused. Now was not the right time to be frank. He had already pushed Shin too far today. If this continued, it would not be good for anyone. Logically, Orochimaru had no right to blame Shinao, but how could a human being be so simple? Because of personal feelings, because of his preference for Shin-chan, Orochimaru retreated. He turned and left. Wait, Shinao tried to reach out to stop her, but the weight in his arm still pushed his arm down. For the first time, the weight of little Chinatsu felt heavier, as if an invisible barrier cut off the path between them. Shinao, the little princess shook her father's arm in confusion, as cute and naive as ever. Chinatsu, let's go back first. Lowering his eyelids, Shinao forced himself to calm down, at least not to scare his beloved daughter. I'm a little tired. Chapter 262, Pursuit. Sitting alone in a deserted study room, Shinao couldn't find a reason. He could only replay that fleeting glimpse in his mind over and over again. He couldn't explain why, but the more he tried to banish the thought from his mind, the more it became etched in his mind, and the more oppressive his chest became. Even if one had already reached the pinnacle of the ninja world, their strength lay only in their physical body and strength. Faced with emotions and the intricate entanglements, even a true Iron Man couldn't survive in this world of mortals. He hurriedly stood up and sat down again. The sensible little Chinatsu didn't bother him. Shinao knew very well that his daughter was far more sensible than others thought. And now, he should have been playing with her, but the inexplicable guilt weighed on him so heavily. Who is that little girl? Question after question, search after search, Shinao could find no answer. She was like a spirit sent from heaven, her gray hair radiant and beautiful, her frail body endearing. But no matter how hard he tried to recall her, he could not find her face, not even that fleeting glance as she turned away, or the silent tears she cried with her back to him. When he finally turned his gaze to the little girl, she turned away as if foreknowing the future. Back then, he had never considered the need to see her face. Back then, she refused to look at him again. His right hand clutched his heart. What had once been the most vital organ in his body had completely lost its value to Jinyoung now. The cultivation of his Yangdun physique had transformed him from a normal human, his weak points no longer limiting him. But now, the area that once belonged to his heart was burning, aching. Why? What was the answer? He stood up again, the wooden door to the study already halfway open. Should he go find her? Or should he go find Orochimaru and ask for clarification? His brow furrowed. Shinyoung never liked to hesitate, but today, this simple decision had him wavering. Should he go find her? In his heart, Shinyoung silently erased Orochimaru's name. That excuse should have been discarded from the beginning. He instinctively didn't want to hide this matter, and if he missed it, he might regret it for the rest of his life. In that case, then let's go. Taking a deep breath, Shinyoung finally pushed open the door. His steps gradually became firmer, and a strong courage urged him to face what had happened. He no longer trembled, nor was he just silent and stiff. It was just that perhaps all this came a little too late, the dividing line of return. He reached out and patted Shien's head, and spoke in a gentle, yet slightly unfamiliar voice, "Rest here for a day first. There's no rush." The little girl seemed to want to say something else, but when she met Orochimaru's concerned gaze, she fell silent again. She just nodded obediently. For a child, there are too many ups and downs to experience in one day, and these things should not be borne by her. Orochimaru finally understood why the Miko had always refused to tell Shien anything about her father. But now that things had come to this, there was no turning back. Orochimaru also understood that if he didn't resolve Shien-chan's grievances this time, Shinai might never have another chance again. Moroku's health was far from optimistic. After this, he feared. He sighed helplessly. From behind, Shien-chan's distraught figure was even more heartbreaking. But as a bystander, Orochimaru could offer her no further assistance. He pushed open the door to the inn, and the little girl vanished without a word. Almost as soon as the door closed, Orochimaru's alto familiar voice echoed from behind. "Where is she?" He didn't turn around, because even if he did, Orochimaru wouldn't have known what expression to use. If it were just another person, Orochimaru would have captured them and taken them to the land of demons. "Aren't you going to ask who she is this time?" he asked pointedly, unfazed by the other person's status as the foremost figure in the ninja world. They were allies, nothing more. She can't see you right now." Orochimaru shook his head. Wasn't his silence at this moment the greatest form of tolerance and anxiety? He understood everything, so he felt equally conflicted. In this matter, it seemed as if no one was wrong. The mistakes were just a joke of fate. "Come in first." The former was helpless, while Shinyoung, who followed closely behind, could only foolishly repeat, "I want to see her." Chapter 263, No Cure. P.S. Decided to go with Route 3. Keep reading. Please don't call me a bitch. The following is the main text. I want to see her. After leaving the room, using the wood release sensor that had already spread throughout the village, Shinyoung effortlessly found Orochimaru, and the girl. Even now, Shinyoung knew full well that the little girl was right next to him, separated from him by a not very solid wall. And now, like a madman, he could only repeat this sentence over and over again. This almost non-existent distance allowed Shinyoung to feel the girl's every breath, every tremor. So, no matter how illogical, no matter how unbelievable, Shinyoung was now certain, she was his daughter. Blood connection was always a sure thing, and Shinyoung had a guess about the child's mother. He was certain that in the past 20 years, he had never done anything to wrong Uzumaki, but this girl's hair color, that pure, beautiful gray, was so remarkably similar to a friend he remembered. Come to think of it, they hadn't seen each other for 4 or 5 years. I want to see her, Orochimaru shook his head. For him, right now, Shien's safety was paramount. The world wasn't that simple, and it wasn't something Shinyoung could resolve on a whim. Even if he was Konoha's hero, even if he stood at the pinnacle of the ninja world, even if Uzumaki and Chinatsu didn't care, the gossip of the public would be enough to destroy Shien. Moreover, after missing that opportunity, Shinyoung had already lost his best chance. She doesn't want to see you yet. Not only did she not want to, but she couldn't. Meeting at this moment would only make things worse. Now wasn't the right time for either Shinayu or Shin. What if I absolutely must? For the first time, a commanding presence filled the room. Years of self-cultivation had gradually improved Shinayu's strength, not just his actual strength, but his absolute confidence and control over his own power. If he chose, Orochimaru might escape him, but he couldn't stop him. But in a split second, Shinayu suddenly withdrew his aura. Because he sensed Shin trembling slightly, just across the wall, she was afraid. Shinayu's heart suddenly twisted. No matter what he did, Chinetsu wouldn't be afraid of her father, because the little princess knew Shinayu was the one who cared for her and loved her the most. But Shin was genuinely afraid of him. He didn't blame her, because he had no right to. A father who can't bring joy to his children is a failure, and to make his daughter fearful is unforgivable. They should have been the closest of family, but now, they were strangers. It was as if a sharp knife had stabbed into Shinayu's chest, stirring constantly, a thick stream of blood mingling with tears of regret, soaking everything. Where's Miroku? How is she? The terrifying aura completely dissipated, and the man sitting across from Orochimaru seemed to have instantly fallen from the throne of the strongest in the ninja world to become an ordinary husband, a most unfit father. The gloomy atmosphere dissipated. Orochimaru should have kept this question a secret, not for the sake of their partnership, or even as a responsibility as a friend, but... he sighed helplessly, then shook his head. This trip to Konoha had been even more frustrating than when Orochimaru had locked himself in his laboratory. He had lost count of how many times he had sighed. It seemed as if the heavens were deliberately making things difficult for this mother and daughter. Both little Shin and the dignified Miko silently endured their own calamity. She's in poor health. You should go see her. Those words suddenly sank Jinayong's heart. He had only ever admired the Miko, but with Shin around, Jinayong couldn't help but feel nervous. Even if they were just ordinary friends, he wouldn't have stood idly by. Not to mention, Miroku was Shin's last remaining relative. Miko's bloodline was always weak, and Jinayong was speechless. Shin probably wouldn't acknowledge his father's existence anytime soon. There was nothing to complain about. Even if he had been completely unaware, having abandoned these mother and daughter for 4 years, Shin's dissatisfaction was obvious. And considering their earlier encounter, Jinayong's wry smile widened. That was truly the worst kind of joke. Therefore, he was even more afraid to let anything happen to Miroku. What happened to her? Although he understood the anxiety of the person in front of him, Orochimaru was speechless. As an ally for so many years, how could he not have thought of a solution? But Miroku's body was getting weaker and weaker day by day. It was as if something was constantly draining the life from her body. He tried his best, just for Shin, but to no avail. And because of the insistence of the Miko, Orochimaru never told Shinayong about this, until recently, when Miroku fell completely ill and had been in a coma many times, Orochimaru was forced to bring her to Konoha at Shin's request. Yes, the purpose of this trip was more important than the recognition of little Shin's relatives. In fact, it was to allow Miroku to see Shinayong for the last time. So, in response to Shinayong's questioning, Orochimaru also said only 4 words. There is no cure. Chapter 264, Departure. Incurable. These 4 words weighed heavily on Shinayong's heart. Orochimaru wasn't one to exaggerate. The rigor of a scientist had long since seeped into every ounce of his being. If he had already made such a judgment, then Miroku's condition would be even worse than he imagined. Shinayong didn't know when he had created Shin, but the facts were staring him in the face. Shin was his and the Miko's child. Had she raised Shin all by herself? Shinayong suddenly didn't dare to think about it, fearing that the uncontrollable guilt would consume him. The silence lasted only a moment. From the very beginning, Shin, who lived next door, had pressed her ear to the wall, listening intently to the conversation between her uncle and her father. And now, her heart clenched once more. Perhaps she would never forgive the man called Senju Shinayu, but Shin was willing to give everything she had to bring him back to her mother. Take me away. Shinayu's voice was filled with extreme fatigue and a subtle sense of relief. He gathered himself, and his deep voice gradually became firmer. Take me back. A complex expression flashed across Orochimaru's face. In the other room, Shin desperately covered her mouth. Perhaps she would never experience the warmth of her father, nor the joy of family reunion, but because of those words, "Take me back," she was willing to give Shinayu the slightest chance. The situation was urgent, and Shinayu didn't bother to greet anyone. He hurriedly summoned Yuin and left a message for Eagle, a busy dividing line. The talisman that had been held in the palm of his hand was finally activated by chakra for the first time, and then there was a golden flash. Ayuri's eyes suddenly shrank. Indeed, if it comes to support capabilities, Konoha is indeed terrifying now. Did you expect it? Turning sideways, behind the fourth generation Namikaze Minato, the old man's sinister voice sounded, without sadness or joy, but as if mocking everything. Are you alright? Although Minato was slightly displeased with some of the old man's methods, based on the information he'd received from Shinayu, no matter how one considered it, Danzo was undoubtedly Konoha's most trusted advisor. Centuries from now, his deeds might not be recorded in writing or even passed down by word of mouth, but the tree roots hidden in the darkness would not have lost a single iota of their merit. In battle after battle, Danzo had given his all for Konoha, without complaint, in his own way. So, regardless of the reason, it was perfectly reasonable for Minato to inquire about the man's condition. A fleeting glance. After the old man nodded slightly, the young Fourth Hokage once again fixed his gaze on his opponent. It wasn't a strange foe, but rather, Minato had a score to settle. The Nine Tails incident. Kushina had nearly perished in that operation. If Shinayu hadn't made a hidden move beforehand, Konoha might have been overthrown overnight. His face, always brimming with smiles, now revealed only seriousness and vigilance. He had already wielded his special kunai, and any slight movement could be the beginning of a major battle. It was indeed unexpected. He didn't remove his mask, but the smile was easily noticeable. A village's cage usually didn't leave without permission. As the symbol and pillar of the village, any single action presented an opportunity for an interception. But for Minato, possessing overwhelming mobility, all this proved to be of little use. If he chose, even Shinayu would likely keep him within his grasp. Space ninjutsu was simply too absolute. But now it seems to be reasonable. There began to be more joy in Ayuri's voice, as if he didn't take the Fourth Hokage in front of him seriously at all. Flying Thunder God is indeed one of the most powerful auxiliary ninjutsu, combined with the mark that Minato may leave at any time. Once the enemy's body is locked by him, then the opponent's death is almost announced. Even for Ayuri, who possesses Kagami Sujetsu, this is still true, but on the other hand, based on the absolute domination of his five senses by Kagami Sujetsu, Minato is now almost like a blind bull, with great power but nowhere to display it. And among the four people, the only one who has not been controlled by Kagami Sujetsu is the old man Danzo. If Minato wants to leave, I'm afraid no one can stop him, but if he wants to retreat unscathed in front of her, he has to take a few people with him. It's a pity that you didn't bring your friends with you, otherwise I really can only choose to retreat, but at the moment. It's not that Ayuri doesn't have the ability to keep one or two people behind. Tisk tisk, she smacked her lips, a hint of disdain evident in her voice. Of course, this was just her usual way of disrupting the other party. Having come this far, how could I possibly not care at all about the man who, along with Senju Shinayu, was known as one of Konoha's twins? Well, if you don't make a move, I'll take the lead. Chapter 265, The Strongest Hokage. P.S. I'm so exhausted. My best friend broke his arm. I took care of him all night and half a day. He just woke up and I'll update you one chapter first. We'll talk about that later. Everyone, I'm such a man of integrity. How dare you not give me the tips and recommendations? Well, if you don't make a move, I'll take the attack. His lips parted, but his words carried the resounding sound of murder. Unlike the usual instantaneous charge, the Oriole, destined to be at a disadvantage in terms of speed, slowly raised his right leg and took a leisurely step forward, row by row, without a trace of anxiety, but the distance between him and Minato was getting closer and closer. Unmatched speed, the illusion of confusing the world. The battle between the two was about to begin. Retreat, he never opened his eyes, but the seasoned Danzo keenly sensed danger. A duel between two peerless masters was hardly the place for an old man or a rookie. He attacked decisively, and retreated without hesitation. The two imps behind him were clearly eager to fight. Having only just mastered their powers, it was premature for them to engage in such a struggle. Retreat. But he couldn't stray too far from Minato. Because of his peculiar abilities, the yondaime was their last resort. In a rapid-fire battle, the The slightest mistake could lead to death. Few ninjas were willing to engage in close combat against an opponent with powers like Kyoka and Sujetsu. Even Minato, with his flying thunder god jutsu, would have found it difficult without the wide area coordinates. Indeed, 4 years ago, he wasn't capable of engaging the opponent in a one-on-one encounter. Gripping the kunai, Minato narrowed his eyes slightly, watching the approaching enemy. Whether by sound, smell, chakra perception, or simply optical perception, there was no doubt that this enemy was real. However, these senses, understandable to normal humans, were meaningless in determining the reality of the being before him. Under the illusion of perfect control over the five senses, these so-called perceptions were no longer as effective as they once were. Those who were ignorant would act rashly and reveal flaws, while those who understood the subtleties would hesitate and ultimately suffer defeat. But even such a powerful ninjutsu was not perfect. With his right hand, he grasped the air, and instantly, the intensely compressed wind chakra gathered in his palm. He thrust with his arch. In stark contrast to the leisurely and carefree manner of the golden flash lived up to its name. In the blink of an eye, a brilliant light streaked across the sky. Rasengan. The suppressed wind was finally released, and in Minato's path, golden afterimages merged into a single mass, ultimately crashing into the enemy's chest. The thunder's power remained undiminished, even more so after years of refinement, allowing Minato to wield it with greater mastery. With the added acceleration of the charge, this Rasengan reached its peak power. Boom! The terrifying destructive force caused the earth to tremble. Cracks like a spiderweb spread from the center of the clash, stretching nearly 100 meters before finally coming to a stop. A successful strike? No, the Yondame's face remained stern, devoid of joy. Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Using the mark left by the charge, he leaped forward. Golden flashes shone once again across the battlefield, leaving a trail of blood. This time, however, it wasn't the enemy who was injured. No problem. He dodged in time, sustaining only minor injuries. A mocking, yet somewhat disdainful laugh echoed. Just as before, Irie continued to advance towards Minato, the only difference being that there was a narrow wound on his left shoulder. Unseen, was this truly an unbeatable limit? Even a ninja as powerful as Golden Flash could only rely on his speed advantage to hold on. No, it wasn't over yet. Minato's face hadn't betrayed any trace of frustration. He was simply waiting for an opportunity, a chance to turn the tables. Holding his breath, his gaze remained fixed firmly on the enemy's approach, unwavering. Still not giving up. While Irie admitted that Namikaze Minato was indeed incredibly fast, once he left a special imprint, even the most powerful ninja wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. On the other hand, without being able to identify his target, Minato couldn't utilize wide-scale wood-release jutsu like Shinryu, making himself invincible. He might be the most powerful assassin, but without someone to guide his deadly blade, his achievements would naturally be limited. Just like now, even though he was staring intently at Uchiha Irie, the real enemy had already arrived behind him, silently and without a trace. The previous round of probing had already given Irie a rough idea of his opponent's current limits. While his targeting abilities remained largely unchanged, his destructive power and speed were significantly improved compared to 4 years ago. He hadn't completely abandoned his training just to become Hokage. But that was all. Although he had managed to escape with Flying Thunder God at the last moment, Irie hadn't used his full strength to prevent any unforeseen consequences. Furthermore, Minato had initiated the attack, leaving Irie with little choice. This time was different. The kunai, gleaming with a cold light, was already raised, firmly gripped in his reverse grip. The nature of Kyoku Sujutsu meant that the opponent wouldn't feel threatened until they were struck. Irie could simply walk up behind him and strike his temple with his kunai. In a single instant, the battle would be over. Stab. Though Irie's plan to invade Konoha would never materialize without defeating Senju Shinryu, she saw the Yondaime here as a valuable option for her future. So, she attacked without hesitation. If she thought, this will secure a victory, and then stabbed forward, everything would seem resolved. No, how could such a thing be possible? Whoosh, a sound of wind rustled, where there shouldn't have been, and Minato, who should have been lying in a pool of blood, suddenly vanished. Danger. A fatal warning echoed through Irie's mind. She didn't even have time to consider how Minato had been able to evade her attack in such a situation. Her subconscious instincts urged her to leave the area immediately. Instantaneous movement. While not quite matching Minato's speed, as a Kage, Ayuri's technique was equally adept. However, instantaneous movement was, after all, merely a form of super-fast movement. She had clearly set her sights on the more distant sand dunes, but upon turning back, she hadn't even moved a single step from where she was before. What was going on? Chapter 266, Cheyenne Ayu Dharma Realm. She had clearly set her sights on the more distant dunes, but looking back, she couldn't move a single step from where she had just been. What was going on? To gain power, to wield it, you had endured countless near-death experiences, but the current situation still exceeded her worst expectations. Had her ninjutsu failed? No, not even a basic ninjutsu like the three-body technique. Even a more complex and powerful forbidden ninjutsu wouldn't fail. The ninjutsu she had just performed remained completely unaffected. While the opponent had unexpectedly dodged her attack, they hadn't immediately launched a counterattack. Why? Without thinking, to cope with the situation, she unleashed a long-unused Uchiha clan secret, Susanoo. Purple chakra instantly enveloped you, and terrifying vibrations echoed from the ground, finally transforming the fear of all living things into the giant's bones, their trembling into the flesh of nightmares. The terrifying monster finally awoke from its long dream and roared to the sky. Is this what a sequel could be? Minato's gaze held no hesitation. Compared to what he'd seen from afar the last time, this one seemed incomplete. At least in terms of size and power, it was far inferior to the level it had during its previous battle with Shinryu. Holding back? That's understandable. After all, from the enemy's perspective, revealing all your cards before fully understanding their tactics would be unwise. But on the other hand, not giving your all initially could be fatal. You can't escape. Minato's voice was cold and calm, completely devoid of his usual sunny optimism. On the battlefield, the golden flash was always so powerful it could bring despair. As soon as he finished speaking, the barrier surrounding Minato and Uchiha Ayuri began to glow subtly. A pale purple halo adorned the battlefield with an even more mysterious hue. It encompassed a roughly 10-meter radius, no more, no less, perfectly trapping both of them. A barrier? Ayuri's brow furrowed. Judging purely from the appearance, this was clearly a barrier, but at least two things puzzled him. First, as the barrier's creator, why did Minato enter it with him? Whether it was a seal or a barrier, the jutsu would be pointless if both were inside. If it were simply an attack or a detection barrier, it wouldn't pose a threat to Ayuri, and the Yondame's attack seemed rather abrupt. Second, and most crucially, how had Minato just barely avoided his attack, and then even caused his own body flicking technique to strangely fail? His chakra flow wasn't disrupted, as if someone had forcibly cancelled the effect of the body flicking technique. Could it be related to this barrier? Ayuri's brow furrowed even deeper. At least before this, the knowledge he'd gained from Madara hadn't contained anything similar. This meant that, like Flying Thunder God, this might be a new ninjutsu developed by the Yondame himself, which meant that its weaknesses were still unknown. He formed hand seals. The Uchiha clan had always been proud of their hand seal speed, and at Ayuri's level, any ninjutsu that required hand seals must be incredibly powerful. Fire style, great fire extinguishing. A terrifying flame suddenly appeared, then gushed madly towards Minato. The temperature, capable of melting even metal and stone, only took a moment to boil the sand beneath his feet, and the latter, Minato, standing directly in front of the flames, seemed to have no intention of dodging. He stood there motionless, his eyes still serious and sharp. Boom, the seething flames opened their bloody maw, roaring and devouring everything. Anything that dared stand in its way was reduced to ashes, except for the man who remained motionless. Yu's eyes narrowed sharply. The air was still filled with a sickening burnt smell. Even the once noisy sand was reduced to wasteland under such a powerful attack, but the man before him, the man known as the Fourth Hokage, not even a corner of whose clothing was affected. His white divine robes fluttered in the wind, and aside from a single wound on his left shoulder, no other scars were visible. Space ninjutsu, you uttered the words through nearly gritted teeth. Her voice was filled with anger and fury, and, of course, a hint of subtle fear. The terrifying flames didn't harm Minato in the slightest. Of course, it wasn't because Minato was invulnerable to fire or water. In fact, with the help of his main Gekyo Sharingan, Ayuri could clearly see the flames pass through Minato's body like a door. They advanced unhindered, destroying everything in their path, because Minato wasn't even there in the first place. This was definitely a special ninjutsu. And if you consider it that way, Everything that had just happened made sense. The barrier here wasn't set up after Minato dodged Iari's attack. In fact, he should have already deployed it earlier, after using the Rasengan. Utilizing this special barrier, which enabled some of Minato's special abilities, he successfully avoided her attack. Not only that, but he also used the same ability to prevent her teleportation. Space-based ninjutsu. A special ninjutsu whose activation and deployment were virtually undetectable. With the exception of Flying Thunder God, Minato had already mastered this power to such an extent. Ignoring Iari's wary gaze, Minato, in a desperate counterattack, clasped his palms together, causing a subtle wave of movement. The barrier began to shift again, the circle of light representing its boundaries began to shrink, and a massive threat began to envelope Iari. Indeed, compared to the ninjutsu scroll that Naruto had casually picked up, this was a truly super forbidden jutsu capable of actual combat. Ninjutsu, aim no Hokage. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 267, Sorry. Ninjutsu, Tengoku Hokage. The barrier began to be activated. Affected by Minato's special ability, the originally regular light circle began to shrink at an extremely fast speed. In just a blink of an eye, the barrier that originally covered an area of dozens of square meters had shrunk to a point where no one could stand. Not only that, after a while, the huge barrier finally became a small purple light dot, quietly floating in the air. And Uchiha. If strictly speaking, she should still be in that tiny barrier at this moment. There is no doubt that this duel has been decided, but Minato's frown did not show any sign of relaxing. He didn't think that woman would be killed so easily, because after all, she almost defeated Zenaion, who used the complete form of the celestial art. After a long night, the sun rose once again, leaping over the horizon. Its golden rays washed the earth, illuminating the blood-stained sands with a shimmering brilliance. The shimmering scenery, like a sunrise at sea, was so beautiful it made one shudder. Let's go back. Minato's voice was a little low. Given his temperament, such a scene wouldn't give him any sense of accomplishment. Even though he could be cold and ruthless in war, the Yondaime was ultimately a kind man, one who bound his life to principles and morality. Compared to fighting, peace was what he longed for. For some reason, Minato felt a vague sense of unease. He raised his head and gazed quietly in the direction of Konoha. Too much had happened today, too many clues, and he needed to discuss it with Shinayu. Behind them, Zenaion reached out to the little girl several times, only to withdraw his hand. He couldn't even pronounce her name fluently, because this debt, this belated care, had already become a huge stone weighing down Zenaion's heart. He smiled bitterly. It was just a bitter smile. What right did he have now to deserve Shiin calling him dad? Zenaion clenched his fists, his blunt nails digging into his palms, but he seemed oblivious. Compared to the pain and struggle within, the physical pain was nothing. Let's go. Without looking back in the direction of the Senju clan, the man's back looked tired and old, even his unrivaled demeanor was completely gone. He never imagined that all the love he had always given to Chinatsu and Usagi would become a dagger that pierced his own flesh and blood. He had done nothing wrong, being loyal to his wife and caring for his children wholeheartedly was only natural. But he had also gone terribly wrong, abandoning his wife and leaving his own flesh and blood behind. He was a complete failure of fatherhood. On one side was the gravely ill Moroku, and on the other was Usagi, who waited for him to come home every day. Choosing either side would be a betrayal of the other. He couldn't tell Usagi that he wanted to marry Moroku, just as he couldn't hide it from Usagi and let Moroku die. The decision was so difficult that he didn't want to dwell on it. Shinai would rather be just an ordinary doctor, and his duty in this line of work was simply to heal and save lives. But, could it really be that simple? His gaze once again fell upon the small head in Orochimaru's arms. The long gray-white hair resembled her mother's, but now, the once vibrant and beautiful hair had lost its cheerful hue. Without this fatherly identity, how could Shinayu make up for his debt to Shiin? Even if he offered, she wouldn't accept. Painfully, he held his head. Finally knowing the truth, Shinayu felt even more bewildered. He couldn't let go of either, yet he was destined to be unable to pick up both at the same time. But for now, there was at least one thing he was certain of. No matter what, he had to go to the land of demons. Even if not for the decision, at least for Shion, and for the woman who had waited for him for so many years. He had to see Miroku. As for other consequences, including the possibility of an enemy attack, they were no longer within his consideration. Sorry. Even though he knew that doing so was just making up for one mistake with another, Shinayu had no choice. Hurry. Chapter 268, Silence Along the Way, Crying All Night, 1. P.S. Second update. Please help me with everything. How much longer? Shinayu asked, frowning. He'd asked the same question countless times along the way. Concern can lead to confusion. As the head of the route, having carried out countless missions across the ninja world, how could Shinayu be unable to measure such a simple distance? But throughout this journey, he never felt at ease. He was afraid. A bystander sees more clearly. Orochimaru could see it all too clearly. The Shinayu who'd been chopping trees and crushing rocks these days was no longer the friend he knew. At least, Orochimaru had never seen Senju Shinayu so flustered and impatient. Whether it was their first negotiation or every collaboration thereafter, besides his terrifying strength, the most profound impression Orochimaru had of this young man was his calmness and shrewdness, belying his age. But now, he was like a child afraid of the dark, desperately running towards home at dusk. He was afraid he would never see that woman again. We're almost there. Orochimaru's voice was still hoarse, but perhaps because of the little Shion in his arms, the coldness was gradually replaced by tenderness. Rest for a while. Without answering, Shinayu just shook his head stubbornly, quickening his pace. Although he had barely slept in the past few days, the burning sensation in his soul urged him to move forward. Orochimaru frowned. Although Shion showed no signs of rest, her increasingly pale face and the bloodshot eyes made Lang Jun wary of carelessness. Rest for a while. This time, his tone was filled with displeasure. Shion is still too young to handle this kind of bumps. His hurried footsteps finally stopped. Guilt towards his daughter ultimately made Shinayu pause for a moment. He could ignore his own body, but not little Shion. For Miroku, she had to be healthy. Uncle, Shion tugged at Orochimaru's clothes. Although her voice was already very weak, the little girl still stubbornly hoped to return to her mother as soon as possible. But when she met Shinayu's concerned gaze as he turned around, she fell silent again. She turned her head away and buried her face in Orochimaru's chest. Because of the unexpected incident when they first met, she still had an almost instinctive resistance to Shinayu. His daughter's avoidance made Shinayu's heart ache again. He forced himself to keep smiling and stretched out his hand to touch little Shion's head, but the latter, who felt something, curled up and avoided him. She must be thirsty. I'll get some water. Nodding to Orochimaru, Shinayu had to find a lame excuse to leave in a hurry. In the backpack behind Orochimaru was the bamboo cup that he had just filled with dew in the morning. Looking at Shion in his arms, whose eyes were also red, Lang Jun could only sigh helplessly. Fate is so cruel. The weak coughs gradually subsided, and after a long moment, a woman's voice, thin as a mosquito's hum, finally rang out. Shion, have you returned, Your Excellency? There's still no news of Miss Shion. Within the gauze curtains, a brief silence fell, and then the weak coughs lingered again. You may leave. Yes. The young woman slowly rose and cautiously exited the Miko's room. After the door creaked shut, only the occasional weak cough could be heard again. Shion. Her amber eyes no longer held the ethereal energy they had when Shinayu had first seen them. Illness and life had weakened the Miko, leaving even those eyes that once seemed to see all truths clouded. Miroku had no regrets in her life. As a Miko, she had finally resolved the long-cherished wish between her generation and the demons. She had accomplished everything she had, without her descendants repeating the tragedy of their ancestors. Even if she died now, she would have no regrets. It should have been like this, if it weren't for Shion, if it weren't for her daughter. Although Miroku was a shrine maiden before becoming a mother, what mother wouldn't want her children to be safe and sound, to watch them grow up before her eyes? Cough cough, her breathing became more difficult, and her coughs became more intense. Alice, the heavens had already blessed her so much, and this time, they didn't intend to extend their grace again. She could barely open her eyes. But Miroku could still feel her life slipping through her fingers. Perhaps when the west wind extinguished the candle, she would die like this, silently. A large hand quietly grasped hers, as if from some distant, unattainable dream. A warm energy began to flow from his fingers, then gently flowed into her veins. Her eyes, which had been unable to open, gradually regained clarity, and the world that had gradually fallen into silence was now filled with the sobs of a man. Hold on. You hold on. She struggled to open her eyes, and that familiar face appeared before her again. Outside the window, there was the sound of misty rain. The witch's smile was fleeting, and then turned into silent tears. You shouldn't have come. Chapter 269, Silence Along the Way, Weeping All Night, 2. By the time Zenyong approached the Ghost Kingdom Palace, it was too late to enter through the main gate. While he couldn't read a Miko's mind at close range, even at close range, Zenyong, mastering the Yang release technique, could still gauge a person's approximate location and situation through the perception of life force. But now, Zenyong could barely sense Moroku's life force. That life force, weaker than a candle in the wind, seemed poised to vanish at any moment. A single gust of night wind and everything would be gone. Zenyong could no longer wait. His inherent time control unleashed, and in a moment, anxious, Zenyong pursued the faint aura towards the unfamiliar palace. Triple speed. Quadruple speed. Quintuple speed. The more he exerted his powers, the slower he felt. He wanted to hurry, even faster, knowing the woman had been waiting for far too long, and he, too late. The scenery around him dissipated like a gust of wind, the fleeting figure now indistinct for ordinary eyes. It was as if a mere breeze playfully drifted by the window lattice. The window, permeated with the fragrance of ancient wood, had been gently pushed open by someone. In a flash, Shinhei finally stood beside the Miko. Her haggard, sickly face had lost the saintly purity she'd once imagined, yet the dying woman seemed to stubbornly maintain the dignity of a Miko. She pursed her lips, her intermittent breathing gradually fading. Her eyes quickly reddened. Shinhei grabbed her hand and, recklessly, poured his own life force into her. Shinhei had already mastered wood release to perfection, and his use of energy, now mastering his two senjutsu, reached an incredible power. And now, like a floodgate unleashed, that terrifying vitality surged madly into the Miko's body. Slowly, her dry, dull hair began to regain its former brightness, and her long, slender eyelashes began to tremble slightly. It worked. It worked. Regardless. Whether it was out of his heart or out of guilt, at this moment, Moroku's safety was paramount. To bring back this woman still languishing on the brink of death, Jinyong didn't mind pouring out all his life force. A warm energy began to flow from his fingers, gently flowing into her veins. Her eyes, once unable to open, gradually regained clarity, and the world that had gradually fallen into silence was now filled with the sobs of a man. Jinyong desperately suppressed his tears. A man doesn't cry easily, but only when he's heartbroken. How could anyone, a human being, always remain as strong as steel? Everyone has a vulnerable side, and for Jinyong, this debt of love was a force that almost drove him to despair. Hold on, with one last push. Moroku's condition was already hopeless, his life force was nearly gone. If this treatment proved ineffective, even a resurrected immortal wouldn't be able to save her, and the reason Moroku was able to regain consciousness now was more akin to a last gasp of life than a cure. The simple infusion of life energy could indeed prolong his life, but like some miracle drug, if used in isolation, it would quickly produce antibodies. After all, it wasn't derived from his own life force. What Zenyong needed to do was to find the root of Moroku's illness before then, and then use his Yang-dun ability to directly regenerate him. Only then could he truly heal the Miko, but soon, Zenyong's brow furrowed. You shouldn't have come, the woman cried. Her voice unusually fragile and sobbing. Don't talk now. Wait until I heal you. The Miko shook her head, her eyes glinting with tears and a deep sense of helplessness. It's no use. My injuries aren't physical, not physical. After sensing the condition within the Miko, Shinhei indeed detected no diseased organs. Rather, everything within her seemed normal, as if she were aging naturally, heading towards death. What's going on? Moroku was reluctant to elaborate, but under Shinhei's anxious gaze, he could only shake his head helplessly. He gripped Shinhei's hand with a slight force, a warm warmth. With such a memory before his death, it seemed as if there were no regrets. Take care of Shian, stop talking. The Miko's eyes closed once more, this time with a more peaceful expression, as if she truly had no regrets. Stay with me. Perhaps this was the first and last time Moroku would act coquettishly towards someone, this man, who had been a mere chance encounter, but now, through various circumstances, had become bound to him, not just because of Shian, but perhaps, because he truly loved him. You can't die. Shin weakly reached out his other hand and quietly held her in his embrace. I owe you so much? You can't die. Hold on. The frail Miko curled her lips, leaning calmly against the man's chest. She spoke in an almost playful tone. Life, at that moment, revealed something greater than its own existence. I don't have much time, but that's not what I want to hear. Jinayong was stunned, and tears finally welled up in his eyes. He hugged the beautiful woman tightly. I love you. Yes, from this moment on, from now on, I love you. I only hope you'll give me the time to love you. A weak hand gently patted Jinayong's back, the woman's voice so gentle. I forgive you. I never blamed you. The most tender words, but also the deepest torment. You don't blame me, forgive me, but how can I forgive myself? How could you let Sachian lose her only mother like this? Tears still streamed down his face, but Jinayong's eyes betrayed a certain resolve. Don't worry, he said, almost emphasizing each word. I will save you. Chapter 270, Dark Clouds Over the City. P.S. Fourth update. Please help. Any news? In the Hokage's office, in the Hokage's building, Minato, long accustomed to the duties of Hokage, could only hold his head up, struggling to comprehend the meaning of all this. There haven't been any unusual incidents yet, but as instructed by the teacher, we've doubled the security, and set up a temporary barrier around the village. Kakashi, masked, was still recognizable by his silver hair. Unlike the original story, he still carried the short sword symbolizing the white fang slung across his back. Yet, I understand, Minato nodded, then waved Kakashi off. Ever since rescuing Danzo and the two little ones that day, a strong sense of unease had lingered over Minato. Having just returned to the village, he intercepted an angry eagle, ready to leave. After finally calming his younger sibling, he learned that Shinayu had left the village not long ago. His reason was to visit a Miko from the land of demons, a Miko with whom he had a daughter. The message was brief, and Shinayu had no time to explain at that time. The result of this was that Wuyuz, who received the message from Yuyan, was furious. Although Wuyuz seemed extremely calm on the surface, she was obviously very angry from the fact that she used the main Gekyo to subdue 11 Konoha garrison troops who tried to stop her. Minato could fully understand Wuyuz's anger, and he didn't mind teaching this guy a lesson together after Shinayu came back, but now was not the time to act on impulse. Because he was in a hurry to leave the village, Shinayu did not have time to hide his tracks, which meant that the information that Senju Shinayu had left Konoha was likely leaked. Without Shinayu, Konoha was still strong, but not that scary, and the recent intelligence sent back one after another from the spies, and the battle that Minato himself had just experienced, reminded him that the ninja world was not peaceful now. It would be better to say that an invisible web of conspiracy was slowly enveloping Konoha. Regardless of whether Shinayu's sudden departure at this moment was a plot by the enemy or simply an accident, Konoha's remaining forces should be further consolidated to strengthen its internal defenses. Minato didn't believe that Uchiha Airi had been eliminated solely with that encounter, at least the strange ninjutsu that had allowed her to escape his special ninjutsu a few years earlier hadn't been used again, and Susanoo hadn't been used to its full potential. All the evidence told Minato that Uchiha Airi hadn't died, and that within the deeper darkness, an invisible hand had begun to operate more obscurely. Ahem, clearing his throat, Minato stood up, straightened his white divine robe, and then abruptly disappeared from the Hokage's office. Compared to the unidentified Shinayu, Waka's mood has been quite unstable these past 2 days. Although his daughter, Chinatsu, has been trying to please her, Minato, as her brother, still brings Kushina to the Senju residence every day. He explains the stakes and tells Waka that someone must protect Chinatsu in Shinayu's absence. Minato isn't worried about Waka sneaking out of the village, but if things like this aren't addressed promptly, this model couple of Konoha will likely run into trouble sooner or later. A wry smile. Could this be considered internal or external trouble? Waka, are you home? It's more appropriate to leave greetings to the usually calm Kushina. After knocking on the door as usual, hurried footsteps naturally echo from the other side. Squeak, the door opens, and the person standing there isn't Tsukijin. Tsukijin, still just a child, is struggling to push it open. It's little Chinatsu. Kushina knelt down, smiling as she patted the little girl's head. Unlike her mother's silence, little Chinatsu seemed her usual bright and cheerful self. Hello, Auntie Kushina, Chitsu, where are your mom and Yuan and the others? Mom's setting up a barrier with my brothers. She seems to be saying there's danger around the village lately, Unlike in ordinary families, in the Senju household, neither Shinayu nor Washi usually hid anything from Chinatsu, especially since the little girl was naturally intelligent. Well, then, little Chinatsu, take us to your mom. Minato smiled as well, his sunny smile still as warming as ever. Okay, Chinatsu nodded obediently, turned around and led the way, but suddenly turned around and said, Uncle Minato, what's the matter? You'd better tell Shinayu to go out and hide. Chinatsu nodded seriously. Mom is really angry this time, and it can't be solved by kneeling with a scroll. We haven't been discovered, but Konoha has somehow increased its vigilance. Zetsu emerged from deep underground, his voice still as annoying as before. Looking at the prosperous Konoha village in the distance, the man slowly spoke. Have you smelled the scent of danger? As expected of Konoha, he paused, then made a deceptive gesture to the people behind him. Get ready, and act at night. A rustling sound came from the moving figures, but no one spoke. We have to be quick. We don't always have such opportunities. Let's get everything done before that guy comes back. Chapter 271, The Nine-Tailed Fox Seizure Plan begins. P.S. Fifth update. Ahem. I'm exhausted, please help me. Konoha's security forces have been fully deployed. In order to deal with possible threats, Minato has only put the entire village on combat readiness. As the strongest force in the ninja world, as a super community of interests that once created a record of defeating 4 enemies alone, Konoha's current situation is far worse than expected. Internally, the village's most important fighting force, Senju Shinayu, is not currently commanding the central army. Konoha's White Fang Hatake Tsukumo was even killed in the previous war. The Cold King Orochimaru has defected, the Mad Demon Jiraiya and Konoha Princess Senjutsu Nate are away, and the Third Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen has resigned many years ago. No matter how you calculate it, the only cage-level fighters Konoha can currently bring to the table are Uchiha and Namikaze Minato. And the younger generation is still far from mature. Externally, despite Konoha's unprecedented victory in the Third Shinobi World War, the entire ninja world began to view Konoha as a potential enemy. This resulted in Konoha establishing absolute prestige within the ninja world, but also facing blockades from other ninja villages. Naturally, the Sand Shinobi, completely powerless and bordering the Land of Fire, had no choice but to fully side with Konoha. However, after witnessing the battle between the Land of Wind and the mysterious men led by Irie, Minato found it difficult to imagine how many reinforcements the Sand Shinobi could send to Konoha at this moment. On the other hand, the Sand Shinobi's great battle and intelligence from other countries also hinted at the existence of a small, yet highly capable enemy lurking in the shadows. Most unsettling of all, this enemy had yet to unleash its full might. The unknown brought fear, and a sober assessment of his own strength only heightened Minato's sense of crisis. Events soon proved the correctness of his earlier decision. The dividing line for starting the attack, disperse, night finally enveloped the entire world. The darkness that symbolizes the unknown and danger drew everything into the arms of death. Every breath, every look carried the smell of destruction and death. In total, the black shadows quickly disappeared at the mountain pass on this side. Some of them said nothing, with solemn expressions, while others were flamboyant, bloodthirsty and crazy. Fortunately, they had only one goal, and what they needed to conquer was Konoha Village, which was known as the strongest village in the ninja world. A very challenging proposition, isn't it? The distance, impassable for ordinary men, was traversed in a flash. The terrifying shadows finally stopped less than 10 meters from the barrier surrounding Konoha. Any further advance would inevitably put them within the sensing range of the troops. Although they had planned from the outset to engage Konoha in a battle, a blind charge into the ninja world's foremost power would be futile. Perhaps, having exposed all their strength, this would be the root cause of defeat for the Akatsuki organization. Tactical planning was inevitable. However, the Rinnegan, possessing mastery of nearly every major ninjutsu, offered a vast array of offensive options. Since their target was the Nine Tails, locating the enemy became a crucial step in the battle. Stealthily infiltrating without disturbing the barrier was undoubtedly the best strategy, but in reality, none of them could do so quickly. Without dismantling the barrier, they would be unable to reach even a single ninja within Konoha Village. If that's the case, the towering Shurido slowly crouched down, then lifted the even smaller Nishido onto his arm. After a brief charge, he flung Nishido whole into the air. An aerial invasion? But how could the barrier protecting Konoha be breached so easily? Intruders spotted over Konoha. The village's barrier squad immediately noticed something was amiss. Almost instantly, intelligence of the intruders' presence was already on its way to the Hokage's office. What's the enemy situation? The details are unknown, but they're invading from the northeast corner, and there's only one of them, only one. Regardless of their number, this act of near warfare had already alerted Konoha. In a matter of moments, every combat post in the village was on standby. And Nishido, flung directly into the village, certainly wasn't about to sit there and wait for death. Akatsuki had their own methods. Even if they couldn't penetrate Konoha's barrier unnoticed, they naturally had their own plan to maximize their search. Summoning technique. Under the cover of darkness, the modest amount of smoke didn't attract anyone's attention, and the next moment, 9 figures appeared within Konoha's territory. Proceed as planned. Chapter 272, The Invasion Begins. PS First update, so, let's begin. The Fire Nation, known as the strongest force in the ninja world and possessing the twins of Konoha, is nearly invincible. And this time, for once, Senju Shinayu is not in the village. The best opportunity has arrived. While it carries the risk of a trap, Konoha is also unaware of the Akatsuki's strength. True to his promise, Pine threw himself into this battle without reservation. His goal, naturally, to capture the Nine Tails. This time, no mercy. The operation begins. First, they must locate the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, hidden somewhere in the village. After all, this mission isn't aimed at destroying Konoha. Ideally, they could retrieve the Nine Tails Jinchuriki without alerting the enemy. On the other hand, their recent incursion has undoubtedly alerted the enemy. In this situation, to ensure the safety of their plan, they need a decoy. If they can divert most of Konoha's attention, the search will naturally proceed more smoothly. Speaking of creating chaos, what could be more terrifying than a catastrophic beast? Animal path, summoning technique. The petite woman braced herself on the ground with one hand, and strange chakra flowed through all the meridians of the black rods attached to her body. This solid corpse then began to show signs of using ninjutsu. Bang! A puff of smoke dissipated, and the once peaceful and tranquil Konoha was suddenly shrouded in a gloom. The eerie silence didn't last long. Soon, the slumbering residents were awakened by the earth-shaking roar. The powerless ordinary people trembled and fled in a direction away from the danger. But how could mortals possibly defeat the towering and powerful bull, resembling a demonic beast? Moo! The beast roared furiously, kicking the ground with anger, shaking even the earth and air. The terrifying acceleration that followed only increased the monster's destructive power to a new level. But this was far from over. Pain seemed to truly be the king of all beasts. One after another, summoned beasts of varying shapes, yet equally powerful, were constantly called upon. They seemed to have come from a terrifying purgatory, vowing to wreak havoc on the world and vent their anger. Boom! 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 Everything in its path was destroyed. Whether it was houses or taverns, nothing could hold the monster back. And just as people desperately awaited death, a figure as swift as a flash suddenly appeared before them. He spread his hands flat, silent, yet he exuded a natural aura of power. On his back, the emblem of the Fourth Hokage carried a certain inspiring power. Space barrier. Gripping a kunai engraved with strange runes, unknown inscriptions instantly covered the ground before him. The bull, so imposing just moments ago, naturally didn't stop, charging headlong into Minato. Then, before everyone's eyes, it vanished into thin air. Boom! Even further from Konoha village, the sound of falling trees echoed. In the panic, the people probably didn't hear the cries of a hidden monster. Anbu, the yondaime shouted, without turning back, and the ninjas who had arrived shortly after Minato appeared. Evacuate everyone immediately. Notice the rest of the village not to engage in a single confrontation. Form nearby combat teams and stand by. Yes, this would likely minimize the damage. Minato's gaze settled again, fixed on where Pine was, with that special chakra, even without using a spatial perception. He could clearly see it. He's not an easy guy to deal with. The last time Pain attacked the village, Minato was seriously injured and lying in the hospital. I didn't expect that their first meeting would be on the battlefield again. Are those the eyes of the six path sages described in legend? As a potential enemy, Minato has already learned information about Pain from Shinayu, including his abilities. But because of this, Minato is even more cautious. A combat team composed of 6 people is almost invincible. As long as there is no problem with the chakra supply, The 6 people with tacit cooperation are enough to deal with most situations. He loosened his right hand slightly, then clenched the kunai again. The opponent had obviously noticed his presence. Judging from the current situation, I'm afraid the battle will start soon. Minato took a deep breath and gathered his nerves. In this battle, speed and time will determine everything. Looking up, the Boston residence was already within sight. Tisk tisk, the fishman chuckled. Effortless, behind him was Samehoda's enormous sword, and powerful blue arms pushed roughly towards the Hokage's door. Click, the door swung open, but what greeted Kisame was not the prey he had imagined, but a gleaming silver short sword. Chapter 273, The Inherited Title. Catcha, the door swung open, but what greeted Kisame wasn't the prey he'd imagined, but a dagger gleaming with silver light. Swish, an aggressive energy surged from his face. In that instant, a terrifying murderous intent mingled with an unwavering determination to take the enemy's head, a dagger that would kill with one strike. Retreat. Reluctantly confronting the enemy would only lead to his death. He had already lost the initiative. If he were pursued relentlessly, he would likely be slain in no time. So Kisame chose to retreat without hesitation. It was the right choice, but it didn't mean he wouldn't have to pay the price for his earlier recklessness. Advance. His straightened hind leg exerted force again, while his front leg, thrusting in a lunge, used the rotation of his ankle to subtly deflect the attack. The blade moved with a movement of his wrist. With a simple flick, the already murderous blade changed its course, slicing diagonally towards the enemy's heart. It was another fatal blow. With no way to retreat, no way to evade, trapped in a corner, Kisame could only muster all his might to roll backwards. Using this extraordinary maneuver, he finally avoided the most fatal blow. But all he could do was avoid the vital point. Missing the target, he fled 1,000 miles. The silver-haired youth didn't hesitate. After unleashing his fatal move, his footsteps didn't falter. Without the sharpness of his short sword, his threat was naturally lost. To try to compromise would be to remain in the past. Having been taught by his father since childhood, he certainly wouldn't make such a mistake. His forward momentum didn't slow, but instead, he stamped his feet, his body ablaze with lightning. Looking back, the youth was crouched atop the giant tree opposite. This was also the first time Kisame saw his opponent's appearance. He was probably in his teens, a custom-made mask covering half his face, revealing only a pair of eyes filled with desolation and murderous intent. In his hand, he held a strange short sword. From blade to blade, everything was a deadly white. Kisame would never forget this sharp sword, for it was its owner who had just inflicted a deep wound on his chest. Draw the sword to meet the enemy. From the very beginning, Akatsuki's plan had not considered the younger generation within Konoha. Lacking the baptism of war, outsiders considered this generation of Konoha's young prodigies far less prosperous than the era of the Konoha twins, but the man standing in Kisame's way shattered this perception. Without a doubt, judging by the combat prowess he had displayed, he was undoubtedly an elite Chunin, and his attack style. Kisame's eyes suddenly widened. It was too late to heal his wounds. It was a long story, but in the eyes of the two, the exchange had just passed in a flash. The silver-haired boy, crouching on the tree branch, even took advantage of the tree's elasticity, and in the blink of an eye, he rushed forward with even greater speed. Ka-la-la, there was no roar, but the sword roared. Unlike before, the terrifying short sword was actually shrouded in a white light that symbolized destruction. And with the boy's powerful sprint, the paleness was even more tinged with a faint thunderous sound. Kill. A straightforward move, without any concealment. His left foot slammed into the ground, and the resulting recoil was transmitted through the sole of the foot, ankle, tibia, and fibula to the waist. The ligaments were stretched to the extreme in this moment, and his whole body seemed like a strong bow stretched to its maximum. Amazingly, this powerful force was once again transformed into forward momentum through the coordination of all his muscles. As the thrust continued, after pushing off the ground with his right foot, the process was repeated once more. It wasn't time or space, the young man simply combined the abilities of every part of his body in the most efficient way. He was so fast that he even left a trail of afterimages, as if he himself was the epitome of speed. Slash. A flash of movement, the powerful momentum was transformed into real destructive power. Unlike his previous exquisite sword techniques, this time, Kisame faced a real frontal attack. The two swords crossed. Silver-white light drew a long arc after the figure scattered, Kisame's left arm was once again torn open by a narrow wound, and the edge of the hideous wound radiated an astonishing heat. Damn it! Panic and anger appeared almost simultaneously, but Kisame had no more opportunities to vent. He could only draw the chakra from Samedhota into his body as quickly as possible, barely healing his wounds. Because the opponent's next attack was about to arrive. And now, only that white light remained in his eyes. Such a ferocious attack method, such a shuddering white brilliance. Kisame only remembered one person with this information. Horizontal sword blocking. For the first time, Samedhota gave up the opportunity to actively attack. In the face of such an incredibly powerful continuous attack, even the famous 7 ninja swordsmen could not raise their heads. Because it was not that ordinary short sword that was fierce and brave. Konoha White Fang, these words were almost squeezed out from between his teeth. The heavy attack had pushed Kisame into dead end. And as his opponent, Kakashi didn't hesitate, not even wanting to speak. He was now just a sharp dagger, words and emotions were superfluous. That's right, from the moment he grasped that dagger, he gave up the identity of Hokage Kakashi, the one he usually enjoyed with his friends. Now he was the dagger's successor. Konoha's sharpest fang. Kill. P.S. First shot. Tonight. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 274, Exchange Injury for Life. Kill. The sword, the king of all weapons, naturally elegant. But on the battlefield, where blood and iron intertwine, the sword is even more beloved by warriors. Because, compared to other weapons, the sword seems born to kill. Its sharp edge thirsts for blood, while its broad back can withstand repeated impacts. It's not easily broken, and even with a bent edge, it can still inflict considerable damage on the enemy. It can be said that even the most incompetent recruit, the moment he grasps the hilt of a sword, possesses the most basic combat capabilities. But White Fang's dagger is different. Its blade, as thin as a cicada's wing, its light in short form, seems to contradict every notion of a sword. It's even closer to a dagger, a playful short sword, than the familiar sword. Indeed, he walks the battlefield wielding this utterly unconventional weapon, relying on his unparalleled strength. This short sword symbolized the glory of an era in Konoha. Before Kakashi, only one ninja had ever earned its recognition and become its master, its only master. His name was Hatake Tsukumo. From then on, both the sword and the legendary figure shared a name that instilled fear and trembling. Konoha White Fang, he uttered the words almost between his teeth, his powerful attack already cornering Kisame. His attack was a simple physical technique, no fancy special skills or extraordinary abilities, he simply maximized the attack, seemingly capable of everyone. Muscles, blood, even every cell in his body, unleashed their full strength towards a single goal, delivering the most devastating blow. No ninja who had truly fought Konoha White Fang was qualified to judge him. Even Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, known as the master of ninjutsu and the greatest ninja of his day, couldn't defeat Hatake Tsukumo at his peak under the same conditions. Because the battles of Konoha White Fang were never decided by victory or defeat. Switch hands and attack again. Kakashi fought faster and faster. The more he fought, the more gloomy and chilling his heart grew, the more fierce his madness grew. Where the blade flashed, there was no longer any attack or defense, not even the silhouettes of people could be distinguished. The god of death on the battlefield seemed to have truly transcended the cycle of reincarnation, once again returning to the place that suited him best. The white dagger danced with flesh and blood, pouring even more blood into the cycle of hell. How could victory or failure be enough to justify the souls who fell under the White Fang's dagger? Under that gleaming cold light, it was only a matter of life and death. Twisting steps and bending bodies, the fleeting shifts brought an even more brutal slaughter. The blade flashed, and the silver-white figure inched closer to Kisame, no longer fleeing. It wasn't exhaustion, but the clashes between the blades became less and less frequent, the blades swifter and faster, until the massive Samedhota could barely withstand the force. Kill. A swordsmanship born for killing naturally only reveals its true value in the act of killing. Having been caught off guard, Kisame was naturally suffering. This nearly one-sided situation was suffocating, let alone turning defeat into victory. It was absurd to think that before the battle, The vast chakra he had accumulated in the great sword Samehoda in order to capture the Jinchuriki was now being used to heal the wounds he sustained in battle. But as a former member of the Mist Shadow Assassination Unit, how could Kisame give up? Even if it weren't for the mission, there was no reason for Kisame to surrender here. Not to mention that Konoha's White Fang had been dead for many years. Even if it was really White Fang himself, his pride as a powerful man would not allow him to be easily eliminated like a mere minion. The battle had only been going on for less than 5 minutes, and although a lot of chakra had been drained from Samehoda, there was still plenty left. Since the enemy's rapid attack was too much to resist, the only thing to do was to find a way to slow him down. With his mind made up, Kisame's movements quickened by a fraction. While he still couldn't stop Kakashi's relentless onslaught, it was finally no longer like the previous moment, where he felt threatened at any moment. His wounds continued to mount. This seemingly one-sided situation didn't end. A dangerous glint flickered in Kisame's eyes. Almost every attack from the opponent was aimed at his vital points. Even if he could barely block it, the opponent would use this opportunity to gain distance, launching another attack before he could retaliate. Blindly following the opponent's rhythm was certainly not a good idea, and Kisame was simply waiting for an opportunity. In the blink of an eye, the two sides exchanged several more rounds, and when Kakashi attacked again, the tip of his blade pointing directly at the opponent's heart, Kisame, who had been at a complete disadvantage, finally found his opportunity. A cruel smile played on his lips. Samehoda didn't lie horizontally in front of him. Instead, he held his blade upright, blocking the attack as he had just done. Chi, crimson sprayed, blood spread. In a mere blink of an eye, the sharp white fang dagger finally revealed its mysterious form, and its tip pierced directly through Kisame's shoulder. A fatal blow? No. Not like that. A strong sense of danger made Kakashi draw his sword and try to escape, but with a bloody grin, the opponent locked the sharp dagger with his nearly shattered shoulder blade muscles. It was only a brief moment, but it was enough. From here on, this is my battlefield. Water style, Great Explosion Water Break. Chapter 275, Unbearable. P.S. Third update here, a new week, rolling around and being cute begging for everything. Everyone, please give me your votes. Before Konoha fell into chaos again, Wasi had already realized what was happening. In fact, both she, Minato, and Kushina had already made preparations. Chinatsu and Naruto had been escorted away by Jinsuke and Obito, along with most of the Senju and Uchiha descendants, and the rest of the clan had also thrown themselves into the fight to protect Konoha village. Of the vast Senju mansion, only Uchiha Wasi remained. It wasn't that Wasi didn't intend to join the fight. Quite the contrary. As Konoha's most important building besides the Hokage building, Wasi remained there precisely to await the enemy's appearance. Tisk tisk. I was planning a big fight, but you're the only one here. A young man, a strangely shaped three-bladed scythe slung over his shoulder, his shirt open and a look of disdain on his face, suddenly appeared in the courtyard of the Senju clan. He habitually licked his lips with a disgusting tongue, revealing a bloodthirsty look. Unfortunately, he still didn't understand the ridiculousness of such a provocation. Just one woman can't satisfy me. Hidden raised his chin with a sneer, and raised the scythe behind him. The sharp blade pointed directly at the woman before him. Prepare for it, take it away. A cold, emotionless voice interrupted the young man's frivolous speech. Although he had not fought on the battlefield for many years, living his daily life as a housewife, Jaiyu had become less cold-blooded than before. The fact that he had been able to endure until now before exploding was unexpected. What did you say? The look that treated him like an ant deeply enraged Hidden, and his furious murderous intent instantly sent him into a rage. The weapon in his hand trembled slightly, as if responding to his master's bloodthirsty call. You lackey, don't you understand what I'm saying? Finally standing, the Uchiha before him had gradually transformed back into the Shura he had been on the battlefield that day. Perhaps influenced by the recent incident with Shinayu, the rage he had suppressed for days finally found an outlet. I'll let you. The woman's voice was terrifyingly low, and at some point, the three Magatama in her eyes suddenly closed, transforming into a scarlet kaleidoscope. Get away, undisguised murderous intent emanated from behind Hidden. From behind, a black thread suddenly encircled his body, pulling him towards her before he could resist. Trying to leave? With a seemingly harmless wave of his right hand, Hidden's right arm, which had been tightly gripping the scythe, was severed at the root. Secret technique. Night Shadow Windmill. Ah! A agonizing scream echoed as the blow struck him. The young man, who had just been so disdainful, instantly grew even more frantic. Damn it! Damn it! How dare you! How dare you! HMPH, with a low growl, the eagle's gaze held an endless murderous look. Being able to see through illusions proves that you are at least qualified to die here. You are too kind. Behind Hidun, Kokuzu spoke expressionlessly while helping his comrade sew up his wounds. Using the illusion provided by the Sharingan, he made the shadow windmill he had cast earlier disappear from the opponent's sight. If he hadn't understood the combat habits of the Uchiha clan and arranged the Earth Grudge in advance, he would probably not have been able to dispel the opponent's illusion in time. If he hadn't reacted quickly and taken advantage of the sudden appearance, Hidun would definitely have been cut in half by the opponent just now. Cold sweat unconsciously slid down from the corners of his eyebrows. Although the report showed that the opponent had been away from the battlefield for a long time, Kokuzu understood the level of the opponent before the action began. If the strength was assessed solely by the level of the Sharingan, the woman in front of him was the real deal, a person with abilities above Uchiha Irie. Taking off his coat, Kokuzu released all the earth resentment that had been sealed within him. If he didn't do this, he wasn't sure he could gain the upper hands in the fight. After all, if it weren't for his temporary desire for the bloodlines of the Uchiha and Senju clans, and if it weren't for his teammate's suggestion, he probably wouldn't have come to such a place. This completely contradicted his strategy of prioritizing profit. But now that they had met, from both sides' perspectives, there was no reason to hastily announce their identities and then walk away. Honestly, Kokuzu had barely considered killing the wielder of the main Gekyo Sharingan head-on. Since the time of the first Demo, Wood release and the Sharingan had been recognized as the strongest bloodlines in the ninja world. Even though he possessed several hearts providing chakra, greatly enhancing his resistance to Genjutsu, that wasn't enough to guarantee victory. The true Sharingan was more than just Genjutsu. But the situation was different. 2 against 1, and with Hidden and his immortal power working together. In other words, as long as he could obtain the enemy's blood, victory was his. Assholes, a roaring Hidden seemed eager to fight back. After his arm was sewn back together, he acted as if nothing had happened and seemed ready to charge forward again, but this time, the angle blocked his path. Go back, Kokuzu tilted his head, his tone stern. Prepare your ritual immediately. With that, he said no more, his vigilant gaze fixed once again on the Uchiha before him. Naturally, his eyes were filled with malice. And across from him, Wasi's patience had finally reached its limit. Enough, she said, then closed her eyes slightly. I'll finish you off right away. Chapter 276, Galen's Wrath. P.S. First update, please give rewards, please recommend. Enough, she said so, and then closed her eyes slightly. I'll take care of you right away. Even though she hadn't made any moves yet, the two people standing opposite Eagle felt a fatal threat at the same time. It was a kind of fear of facing death. For the two of them, they were obviously the two people farthest away from death, but when the woman said so, their instinct told them that the extreme terror that they had not tasted for a long time was slowly approaching them. They couldn't wait any longer. Although the results of a rash attack before the opponent made a move were indeed limited, if he didn't take the initiative here, but quietly waited for the opponent to reveal a flaw, Kokuzu believed that he would never get what he wanted. Kalala, a chilling voice rang out, and the monstrous body, already resembling a monster, transformed once more. Behind him, the 4 masks that had been sealed suddenly began to swell, and then, like cells dividing, 4 new monsters, each with its own distinct appearance, grew from his body. Knock. 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 A dull, steady sound landed on the ground, and in a moment, behind Kokuzu stood 4 monsters composed entirely of earthly resentments. In terms of height, they even surpassed Kokuzu himself, and each of them wore a strange mask covering their face. A deep, cold light began to emanate from their previously empty eyes. The forbidden jutsu had appeared. Kokuzu glanced at the enthusiastic Hidden. The ritual was complete, and the next task was his own. So, attack. Forming hand seals, Kokuzu, as the main body, took the lead, Earth-style, rock corridor. As a ninja who had met and even fought the Shogun, even Suna, leaving aside his other achievements, his very existence was the greatest testament to his strength. Kokuzu. The name might not be familiar to the average ninja, but in the dark world, among the ambitious and the wandering, it was a living legend. No one knew how long he had lived, It seemed as if Kakuzu had been a mercenary on every battlefield since the dawn of the ninja profession. His methods were even simpler than his name, a single word, money. Yes, this terrifyingly powerful monster seemed to lack the self-awareness of other powerful beings. Instead, his pursuit of wealth and material goods surpassed all else. If it weren't for this, he probably wouldn't have surrendered to the dark side. Within the underground exchange, any high bounty target would be wary of Kakuzu. For a hunter without any axe to grind, anyone could be his next target. And the very foundation of his long life and strength was those 4 silent monsters. The massive black monster leaned back slightly, like a human gulping for air, and then, as his body tilted, his terrifying ninjutsu finally unleashed. Fire style, headache. An extremely powerful fire style ninjutsu is released from the front. The only exit left by the rock corridor was facing Kakuzu, and at this moment, the astonishingly powerful fire style rushed in from the front, cutting off all the enemy's chances of survival. But this is not over yet. The enemy is the legendary Uchiha clan, and an enemy who has opened the eternal Mangekyo. If this combination attack is against an ordinary enemy, it would not be surprising even if it is a one-hit kill, but if the opponent is her, it is naturally a different story. The fire style in this small space is almost equivalent to an explosion, and with the activation of another monster, the fire is further assisted. Wind style, divine storm. The wind helps the fire, and the firepower is even stronger. The already ferocious fire style, with the help of wind style, immediately became even more ferocious. Deep within the cave, Eagle remained unmoved by what was unfolding before her. Her beautiful eyes remained gently closed, but the expression of suppressed rage betrayed her inner feelings. A fierce desire for destruction gradually took over, and just before the attack was about to strike, the eerie and treacherous Mangekyo finally opened. A low, whispered word shook the world. The flames, symbolizing ruthlessness, struck their target squarely, then gradually vanished into thin air, as if they had never existed in this world. Kakuzu's eyes narrowed suddenly. Although he had prepared for the worst before the battle, he hadn't expected the opponent to reach this level. While not yet as powerful as Uchiha Madara, judging by this, the woman before him was undoubtedly on par with Irie in terms of Sharingan mastery. Using fire release in front of the Uchiha. I admire your courage, a cold voice echoed from the other side. The once sturdy rock corridor was now riddled with holes. And the horrifying scene before Kakuzu and the other man almost made them lose the courage to resist. Usagi stepped towards the 2 men. Indeed, the one who had withstood the combined ninjutsu attack was none other than Susanoo, arguably the Uchiha's greatest ability. However, the Susa before him was completely different from what people remembered or what they had previously inferred. Kacha, the longsword at his waist, though only half of it, was clearly visible, its imposing armor clearly visible. What the hell is this? Hidden's voice finally tinged with panic for the first time. The intelligence had already mentioned the other party's ability to use Susanoo, but this sight still exceeded the previous plans. So, you will be the first to die at the hands of Galen. Usagi's tone was calm, yet within that calmness was a certain chilling power. And as she spoke, 18 half-giants of various shapes and forms advanced behind her. 18 Suzuka. Or will you kill yourselves first? Chapter 277, I am willing to change. P.S. Second update. Keep begging for votes. Tisk, tisk, only a little over 200 votes. So sad. Meanwhile, Shino, still in the land of demons, is unaware of the changes taking place in Konoha, but he faces another crisis. The gentlest words are also the deepest torment. You don't blame me, forgive me, but how can I forgive myself? How could you let a Seichian lose her only mother like this? Tears still stream down his face, but Shinayu's eyes reveal a certain resolve. Don't worry, he said almost word by word, I will save you. The beloved in his arms was stunned at first, then smiled helplessly. Perhaps, for the shrine maiden, it was enough to hear such sweet words in the last moments of her life. She never asked for much, because this man did nothing wrong, he didn't owe her anything, Seichian was just an accident. Since she decided to conceal it from then on, it was destined to be her own problem. 5 years ago, on the day when Shinayu pulled the ghost into her body, the shrine maiden extended a helping hand at the most critical moment. With the energy given by the shrine maiden, Shinayu finally sealed the ghost in his body at the last moment, and when he finally let go and fell into the arms of the shrine maiden, the wood escape energy that had been stimulated to the extreme finally began to run wild. Without the control of his master, Shinayong dared to absorb all energy close to himself, of course, including the Shrine Maiden's ability and vitality. Perhaps it was fate, perhaps a divine trick, but the energy the Miko had previously provided to Shinayong for the seal took effect. Within a very short time, while the Miko's energy was drawn into Shinayong's body, it wasn't directly absorbed, instead maintaining a relatively independent state. This bizarre phenomenon, viewed from a macroscopic perspective, was the Miko's body gradually merging with Shinayong's. At the same time, however, the Miko, identified as possessing same energy, was able to regain some degree of control over her own body. This sudden change was beyond Moroku's expectations, but if he forcibly withdrew his hand at this point, he couldn't guarantee he wouldn't harm Shinayong, let alone affect the already solidified seal, so, the kind-hearted Miko chose to let it go. This decision forever changed the course of both of their lives. Fortunately, the Miko left Shinayu's body shortly thereafter. The slightly more troublesome thing was that she began to sense Shinayu's inner thoughts. Of course, the real problem wasn't discovered until Shinayu fled to the land of demons. Moroku began to realize that a life was growing within her, and that the child's origins might be connected to the accident. If he had explained it to Shinayu at that time, it wouldn't have seemed out of place. But the Miko, capable of reading minds, had long understood that Shinayu already had a wife, and even a child. So, the cultivator refrained from joining in this worldly turmoil. She decided to give birth to the child and raise her alone. Unfortunately, now, she couldn't see Shian until she was old enough. Take good care of Shian, the Miko's voice weakened again. The infusion of life energy was like a final, last gasp of life, and the beautiful Miko had exhausted her last bit of strength. Shinai remained silent. But that wasn't indifference. He had said he would save Moroku, even if it meant making amends, he would save her. No matter the cost. Closing his eyes, the two yin and yang escape techniques within his body, already capable of free transformation, were simultaneously activated. Though this was only theoretically possible, and even in experiments, its feasibility had never been proven, Xianyang could no longer care. The energy within his body was frantically mobilizing, and the once vital yang escape technique began to transform into the destructive yin escape technique on a large scale. Almost as soon as this process began, the inscriptions of Sage Mode crawled across Xianyang's body, and the explosive, conflicting energies began to wreak havoc within him. HMPH, he let out a muffled groan, and the churning blood and ki threatened to spurt out. Not only from his mouth and ears, but even from his skin and pores, blood began to flow bright red. A desperate struggle. The yang escape energy could still be controlled, but the yin escape energy, which had only recently been transformed, became more and more like a wild horse, flowing throughout Xianyang's body, completely out of control. He gritted his teeth. Xianyang secretly steeled himself, enduring the pain that felt like it was tearing his entire body apart as he forcibly suppressed the raging yin dan. While this thirst-quenching method was almost certain to lead to an even more brutal outburst, Xianyang couldn't care less at this moment. The two energies within his body had almost reached equilibrium, and at that moment, Xianyang continuously channeled the pacified yin-dan energy into Moroku's body. Even Xianyang couldn't control this divine power, which far exceeded the level of ordinary life energy. With a balance broken, a terrifying explosion suddenly erupted elsewhere in Xianyang's body. Bang! A booming sound, easily audible even to ordinary people, echoed from his body. Although his dependence on internal organs had been minimized after becoming woody, the energy he once used to restore himself suddenly became a frenzied destroyer. Even Xianyang couldn't withstand such damage. Puff! The unimaginable pain finally caused a mouthful of hot blood to spurt from his mouth, but there was no hesitation in the man's eyes. As long as you can survive, I'm willing to exchange my life for yours. Chapter 278, The Man Faster Than Light, 1. P.S. Third update. I have an anatomy exam tomorrow, and I don't know if I'll have time for another one. I'm still begging for everything. Not to mention the precarious situation Shinai is in right now. Back in Konoha, the war is intensifying. He loosened his grip slightly, then clenched the kune once more. The enemy had clearly noticed his presence. Judging by the current situation, a fight was imminent, wasn't it? Minato took a deep breath, bracing himself. Before this, he'd gotten information from Shinai about the 6 paths of pain and even Nagato. In Minato's opinion, the root's intelligence network was indeed formidable, even understanding the enemy's habits and techniques. The 6 paths of pain, mastered all mainstream ninjutsu. One could absorb chakra, one could mechanize his body, granting him powerful mid-range and long-range combat capabilities, one could extract the enemy's soul and read their memories, one could summon multiple summon beasts, one could resurrect all members, and the last one even possessed the power of gravity, repulsion, and other forbidden techniques. Sharing vision, intelligence, and coordination, because they were all the work of one person, there was no conflict at all. No matter how you consider it, such an enemy would be difficult to defeat with the power of one person. Or rather, if human strength were used as a guide, no matter how hard you struggled, it would be difficult to survive a 1-on-6 battle. At least, according to Shinayu, the only ones who had ever accomplished this were Uchiha Airi, who wielded the Kyokushu Jetsu, and the ninja world's foremost, Shinayu Senju himself. Minato was not arrogant, but he also never underestimated himself. But right now, even the so-called Golden Flash couldn't guarantee victory in a stalemate in positional battle. Of course, Minato had no intention of evading. As Hokage, as the protector of this village, how could he possibly back down? "Have you noticed me?" he muttered to himself, his gaze fixed on the other man. The distance between them wasn't very close. Judging by the speed of both sides, even if Minato didn't use space ninjutsu, the battle would begin very quickly. And judging by the other man's movement pattern, his eyes fixed, Minato was on full alert. So they're heading my way, in a positional battle. 6 paths pain, possessing the Rinnegan, held an undeniable advantage. With a combined strength of the 6, they could certainly slow Minato down, at some cost. Once restrained, the situation would be overwhelmingly one-sided in Pain's favor. Therefore, in this battle, speed and timing would determine everything. It was decided. Throwing a special kunai, the Yondaime vanished instantly. That swiftness, leaving no room for reaction, was the golden flash that Konoha was so proud of. Even more daunting than the enemy's combat prowess, their formidable support capabilities and elusive attacks were even more terrifying. They must be eliminated immediately upon the first opportunity. If they were allowed to act arbitrarily on the battlefield, their plan to capture the 9 tails today would be futile. Let's go. 6 of us, united as one, our focus unimpeded. Originally engaged in aimless destruction, the 6 men simultaneously turned, their direction naturally heading towards Minato's position. However, simply sitting back and waiting for death was not the Yondaime style. A flash of light. The foot had barely moved. The right foot tapping the ground, the force transmitted through the ankle barely radiating through the entire body, even the left foot, already advancing with the urge to move forward, had barely had time to lift. In that lightning-fast moment, a flash of golden light appeared before the 6 men. No one had witnessed such speed in a long time. Compared to the continuous, overwhelming attacks of Konoha White Fang, this being before them was, in some ways, even more terrifying. It seems you've never considered this. In war, facing an enemy invading his village, Minato was always merciless. His kunai thrusts pierced the opponent's abdomen in an instant. Starting a war within Konoha would indeed bring the greatest damage to Konoha, but on the other hand, whose home turf is Konoha? That man, seemingly faster than lightning, lived up to his reputation as the battlefield's death god. If you wanted to become his enemy, then you couldn't let your guard down at any moment. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.